Hello and welcome everyone. This is Michael Gibbs. Can you hear me? If you can hear me, let me know in the chat box. Hi, Data Dave. Can you hear me on this call? I just want to make sure before we begin. Okay. Wonderful Thaja, wonderful Rinku, wonderful Data Dave. Fantastic. So now that I know you can hear me, we're going to go back into the training. And we're going to begin training. We're going to begin training, but let me say hello to you guys first. Ariona, so wonderful to have you here. Rick, so great to have you here. Akaboom, wonderful to have you here. Priscilla, great to have you here. Rinku, great to have you here. We are thrilled to have you here, and we'll try and do everything we want to make this a great experience. K1, welcome. Portia, welcome. Ariana, fantastic. I love seeing you guys here. We may or may not have a very big group or a very small group. Who knows? It's a Saturday morning. And with the Saturday, we don't know, but we're just thrilled to have you. And of course, this will be available for replay later. Welcome, Harold. Harold, I'm so happy to have you here. So we're going to begin today by talking about Amazon Kinesis because we're realistically speaking going through the services that are provided on AWS. That's a lot of what we're going to be doing. Welcome, Priscilla. Welcome, Jeannie. What's going to happen is we're going to spend approximately 20 minutes on content and 10 minutes in question and answer sessions throughout the day because I want to make this as close to possible as we can to a real life live experience. What we're going to do is we're going to have Dave from my team, and Dave from my team is going to do the following. If questions pop up, he's going to collect the questions, aggregate the questions, and every time we stop, Dave is going to send me the questions and I'll answer them. So that's the format that we can do to make sure we can answer as many of your questions as possible because we really want to create a live classroom-like experience. A little bit about me in case you don't know. My name is Michael Gibbs and I'm the CEO and founder of Go Cloud Architects, an organization dedicated towards building high-performance cloud computing careers. We are in the business of either teaching people how to get their first cloud architect job or teaching people how to get promoted in their careers. Certification is part of the process to getting your first cloud architect job. It's only about 10%. The remaining 9% pertains to emotional intelligence, presentation, empathy, enthusiasm, interview training, and the communication skills that are necessary to be there, especially communication skills and presentation skills for the architecture world because it's a cross between an executive and an engineering role. But these are the things that are skills necessary, but today we're going to talk about certification. I just want to make sure we set the right expectations for you that certification is part of the process. When we talk about certification, we typically try and go as close to as possible as architecture and away from engineering. We still have to give you enough of the engineering on these calls to be able to help you with the certification exam, which is part of the process. So now we're going to talk about Amazon Kinesis. So what is Kinesis? First and foremost, Kinesis is an AWS service that's really used for collecting, processing, and analyzing streaming data. So when you're getting large amounts of information for lots of sources, this is where you're going to use Kinesis. And what's really great about Kinesis is that it can actually collect and help you analyze your data in real time. So, typically think about it, real-time access to your data, real-time analysis. What kind of better decisions can you make if you can get recommendations in real time as opposed to historical data? So this is some really cool stuff. Again, as I've mentioned, there's things that the network and the data center do better. There's things that the cloud do better. And I always architecturally want to help you understand the right choices for the right situations. This, or the ability to take streaming data and in real time, do something about it, fantastic. One of the huge benefits of the cloud. So Kinesis can actually collect data from a lot of real-time applications, video, audio, application logs, clicks on your website like a clickstream, Internet of Things devices, literally everything. And this is, again, one of those cloud native things or cloud functions that get really, really great that we love when we get to see these things. So unlike a traditional environment, what's going to happen, and traditionally speaking, you're going to collect your data, then you're going to store it, and then you're going to analyze it, but here you're doing it in real time. So could give an organization a fairly substantial competitive advantage. So why use Kinesis? We covered it for the most part, and realistically speaking, you're taking in large amounts of data, and you're going to be analyzing them and doing something about them in real time. So example would be these weather sensors that could be literally spread out all over the world that are going to send you every 5 minutes, my temperature, my humidity, that kind of thing. It could be you've got all these airplanes that are flying through the sky and you need to know what their status is. Great use for this kind of thing. These applications that we're talking about, these Internet of Things, these sensor data, they just send stuff so fast. And being able to do something with the streaming information in real time is truly amazing. So because of this, there's realistically speaking 4 different Kinesis platforms in the AWS environment, and they're all used for different things. So we're going to talk about Kinesis video streams, Kinesis data streams, Kinesis Data Firehose, and Kinesis Data Analytics. We're going to begin with Kinesis video streams. So Kinesis video streams is designed just for video, and it enables you to basically collect video from multiple sources. So you've got video, they're coming in from lots of sources. What are you going to do with it? You can basically ingest and store the videos, and you can then basically take these videos that you've came in and learned, and you can set it for processing, maybe some machine learning to identify certain things in the video. For example, do you have some person that you don't want in the video? Do you have something that's against your brand in the video? You can use these kind of video streams, and you can do some types of machine learning applications to really analyze videos to make sure they contain what you want. So let's look at this realistically speaking for a minute and see what it would actually look like visually. You take your video stream, you place it into Kinesis, and you can do some processing on it. Maybe your processing could be taking raw video and compress it down to an H.264 or H.265 codec to shrink the file size. Maybe it could be burning in captions, or maybe it could be looking for things in patterns. So it could be any one of those kinds of things. That's what you're using Kinesis video streams for. Very helpful in organizations that are highly dependent upon video. So since we talked about video streams, let's talk about the next Kinesis service, which is data streams. And Kinesis Data Streams is really a highly scalable platform for analyzing real-time streaming data. So this is the stuff that gets exciting from a business perspective outside of the video, because it can capture your data and send to your data analytics application within 70 milliseconds. So that's not bad. 70 thousandths of a second, or less than 1/10 of a second, you're literally in your data analytics application. That can give you some great business intelligence. So Kinesis data streams can capture gigabytes per second of data from hundreds and thousands of sources, so fantastic. So start thinking about these Kinesis data streams for a large number of financial transactions or location tracking. So lots of data that can be ingested, that can be exported with regards to business intelligence. So let's look at what this would look like architecturally speaking. The streaming data is going to be captured by Kinesis data streams. It's going to be then set to Kinesis, and then it's going to be outputted to a business intelligence tool. What a great way to basically have access to your data and do something about it in real time. So we love these kind of things. So let's talk about some Kinesis data streams concepts. When you're going to have these data streams, and bear with me, there's a little bit of something that's slightly going on with my, here we go, with my application, so you can see it in the video. You're dealing with both a data producer as well as a data consumer. So when you're dealing with applications, the producer is something that's typically sending all the data records to the stream. So think of your weather sensors, that kind of thing. Versus a data consumer, think about who's using it. So your producers are going to send you the data. And when you're dealing with data producers, they get assigned a partition key to their records, and their key is going to determine which shard ingests these things. So basically, you have your data coming in, they come into a shard, which has a record of throughput, and that's how things come in. Now that's the producer. Now the consumer is the service that's receiving all this information from the shards. So consumers are basically going to analyze it. So producer send, consumer receives and uses it. So just understand that concept in AWS, they break it down into producer versus consumer. And when you're dealing with these, there's a couple more key concepts that you need to worry about. So what is a data stream? It's a logical grouping of shards, and a data stream will retain, be kept for about 24 hours by default. So now we keep saying shards. What is a shard? It's realistically speaking just a base throughput unit in AWS. So let's go through this one more time. Producers are sending your data. Consumers are receiving your data and doing something with the data. The stream is where it's all coming in, which is a logical grouping of the shards, which are taking the data to you. And a shard is just basically a throughput unit. So just look at it that way. Since, a lot of these vendors, they make up their own terms, they get kind of complicated. So let's try and take the complexity out of it. So we talked about taking all this stuff in and doing something about it with Kinesis data streams. So we talked about lots of sources. So a large event data collection, real-time analytics, capturing data from people that are playing games, mobile data, kinesis data streams, lots of data, come in, do something about them, analyze it real time. Now, we talked about kinesis video streams used for video. We talked about kinesis data streams set for data. Now we'll talk about the concept of Kinesis Firehose. Similar to streams, but a little bit different. What is Kinesis Data Firehose? Basically, you take your information. It's a managed service, of course. You take your information and then you stream it into your data store, your data lakes, your data analytics service. So Kinesis Data Firehose is pretty cool in that it can basically capture your streaming data and then stick it in, say, S3 for you or Redshift or a whole lot of other services. And it's pretty scalable because it's gonna auto scale to make sure that it has enough volume to be able to handle your data streams. So Kinesis Data Firehose, take your data in, do something with it, and store it. So again, with all these things, they're using the concept of shards, and shards are just a measure of throughput. And when you pay for this, you're basically paying for the number of shards that you're using or the amount of throughput. So understand how that works. So what does this look like architecturally? And I understand some of these things are some fairly dry concepts, but we still have to go through them because they're going to be part of the exam. And Kinesis is one of those great things that you can use on the cloud. So maybe a little dry, but it's a valuable service. And architecturally, I want to make sure every cloud architect is understanding of these services in case they're doing cloud architecture work on AWS. So let's look at this here. Basically, you've got your data streams. It comes into the data. It comes into Amazon Kinesis Firehose. You moves it to your S3 bucket, for example, and then you can look at it with your BI tools or your business intelligence tools, analysis tools. Great service. Lots of useful things that it can do, but just understand what it is and what it isn't. So now we'll talk about Kinesis data, a little more about the Kinesis Data Firehose. Just understand that it's used to connect things, and there's the concept of a record. And the record is basically data that your data produces sending to the Kinesis Firehose stream. And it can be upwards of up to a meg in size. So just understand that kind of concept for your Data Firehose. Don't want to go too much depth in it, but just understand data coming in. Kinesis Data Firehose, output it to say S3, popped into Redshift, use your business analytics tools and do something about it. Now, the last thing we're going to use before we get on to some much more interesting topics, we're going to talk about Kinesis Data Analytics. And what is that? That's the real-time service that's going to give you real-time analysis. So Kinesis Data Analytics is a managed service to take your streaming service and transform it so you can analyze it in real time. So it basically uses Apache Flink. So it's basically taking these things in, working with Flink. And of course, it's going to auto-scale to meet your needs. And then you can look at the things that are going on, and you can query them with SQL queries. So that's what you need to know about Kinesis Data Analytics, real-time analytics. What does it look like architecturally speaking? I can show you right here. Your data is going to be captured by the streams, and then it's going to be placed or wherever it's coming from, and then it's going to be basically placed. You'll be able to analyze it with your BI tools. So lots of data from real-time things, lots of analysis. Now, that's kind of an ugly topic to talk about, but understand from a business perspective and a business impact perspective, this is incredibly helpful because you can take in streaming information and make better decisions. And the faster you can make these decisions, the better your organization is going to do. So now you know about that. So here are some critical things for cloud architects to know. A cloud architect is basically designing a service and basically going to use the cloud to help an organization meet their business goals with technology. We used to do it in the network and the data center. Now we're doing it on the cloud. So when you're dealing with the cloud, there's two kinds of training that are really important. You have to understand the network and data center, and you have to understand the cloud. So the cloud is nothing more than a network, virtualized network in a data center. But when you're dealing with these kind of things, what are those technologies? Well, when you're dealing with computing on the cloud, you're either dealing with a virtual machine or a container, and that's it. Virtual machine, container, in some way, shape, or form, that's what you're using. Virtual machine is you take a server, you install a hypervisor, and you chop the physical server into logical servers. The alternative is basically, I call it the equivalent of virtualizing an operating system, even though it exactly isn't, is you take inside of your operating system, you create a logically isolated space that borrows libraries from the operating system, and then you install your application in there. And it's self-contained, it's small, it's lightweight. Unlike virtualization, it does not have the overhead of a hypervisor as well as a second operating system. Very lightweight environment. A server that may used to handle 20 VMs might be able to do a few hundred containers. Great, lightweight, high performance, start fast, usable, excellent environment. So because of that, we have to talk about containers. So when you're dealing with a compute environment, there's lots of ways you could do your containers. You can use the way you always did it. You could set up your own Kubernetes cluster, for example, on a bunch of EC2 instances, or you can use some of the managed services that are provided for you by AWS. So we're going to tell you how to do all of them, because containers are your second basic compute platform on the cloud, and as a cloud architect, you must know how containers work. So option one is basically speaking to set up your own container management system exactly the way that you do it in the cloud. You would do that by basically taking EC2 instances, you'd set up your Kubernetes clusters, and then you move on, and that's it. It would work perfectly. That's what organizations do in their data centers. Now let's talk about the next managed service that we have. The first managed service that we're going to talk about is the Elastic Container Service. And I had mentioned that a container is basically a lightweight version of a virtual machine. See, the virtual machine requires an entire copy of the operating system, and the container does not. It basically has enough of the operating system libraries that it's going to pull from, and it's going to pull from whatever dependencies it needs, and it's just going to have the application, and that's it. It's going to run on its own, independently. So, super lightweight, so much less memory and CPU resources. Lots of containers can run on a single server or even a virtual machine in many cases. Here's the thing, that containers are logically isolated from each other, so they're theoretically very secure. Now, nothing can be as secure as a virtual machine because the whole systems are separated, and in a virtual machine, if the virtual machine crashes, only that one goes down. Whereas in a container environment, if the operating system were to crash, the entire system would go down. So understand the architectural differences, but containers are a really great way to do it. So you have the concept of using a container management service. So AWS actually has their own container management service. And instead of you setting up your container management service and then set up your containers on the server, you can realistically use their fully managed container management service. So there's two that you could choose from. The first one that you could choose is basically what they call Amazon Elastic Container Service, otherwise known as ECS. And what is ECS? It's a way that they manage or orchestrate your containers. They consider it to be a high availability service because it's 99.99% available. That means 1 hour downtime or 52 minutes of downtime. So you can determine if you feel that's high availability of your enough based upon your system's requirements. And ECS is deployed inside of your VPC, which enables you to use security functions like network ACLs and security groups. Now you can take these containers, which are going to be managed by the container service, and I'm going to show you more. It could be deployed on an EC2 instance, and we'll show you what that would look like, or we'll tell you what that would look like, or you can run it on Fargate, which we'll talk about in a minute. So let's realistically look at what we're dealing with a container. So when you're dealing with containers, you've got your server, and you obviously have your operating system, and you have your logically separated containers. Now, it's quite possible, not always, that you could have your server, then you could have a hypervisor, and then you could have your host operating system, and then you could have your containers in there, in which case, in this environment, what would actually be going on would be, for example, you would put it on a virtual machine, or it can be on a bare metal server. Realistically speaking, at least that's what most of us do. So we take our server, we install our operating system, and then we put our containers on there. And that way you get performance. Because whenever you're dealing with a virtualized environment, you get a 5 to 30% performance hit from using virtualization. So doing this on bare metal enables you to support a lot more containers. You may or may not be able to do that on the cloud based upon the type of instance that you actually have. Dedicated instance, dedicated host. But these are typically the way they're done. On the cloud, they're typically done on a virtual machine. So let's look at the way you would actually use these. So there's two ways you can actually do this. If you're not going to use Fargate, basically speaking, you're going to set up your own EC2 instance. You'd use your Elastic Container Service. Then you'd set up your containers. You'd launch an EC2 instance. And then on there, that's where you would provision your containers, and your containers would be placed on them. You'd install your applications, and that's it. You'd basically pay for an EC2 instance, and you could have a lot of containers running on those EC2 instances. That's the way a lot of organizations do that. Now, you could also do this another way. Instead of using an EC2 instance, you could basically do this in a serverless environment if you were so inclined. So you could have the Elastic Container Service managing a serverless container service, which AWS calls Fargate. Now, when you're doing this, it's going to be a lot easier because you're not managing as many things. You're not managing the EC2 instance. But also understand, now you're serverless, you have less control. So they will say that ECS with Fargate will have unlimited scalability or close to it. You be the judge of the control that you actually need of your environment and your container services. Your control, your ability to move on and off the cloud, your performance requirements will always determine your best architectural decision. So there's no such thing as a right or wrong decision. You have to determine what's best for the organization. So if you were going to use ECS with Fargate in a serverless environment, it's going to be a lot easier because it's managed. Basically, you set up the ECS, you point it to Fargate, then you build your containers, you define whatever you need and performance requirements, and then basically that's it. The applications get run, they get managed, and you just pay for what you use. So that's realistically speaking the way this can typically be done and is often used. Now, we talked about the Elastic Container Service. This is Amazon AWS proprietary. What does the rest of the world do? The rest of the world, for the most part, uses Kubernetes clusters. So if you wanted to use Kubernetes clusters on the cloud, you absolutely can. And they call that Amazon Elastic Kubernetes Service. What is Kubernetes Service? It is, again, going to be an environment to manage your cloud. So if you wanted a Kubernetes cluster, again, you could do it on your own. You could stick one EC2 instances, which is the same way you would do it in your data center. Or instead of using the Amazon proprietary container service, you could use the Amazon industry standard container service. And that's called Elastic Kubernetes Service. And that's using the industry standard Kubernetes, which is like the de facto standard. So if you're using the Elastic Kubernetes Service, Kubernetes containers that you're running in your data center can go straight to the cloud with no modification, which means on and off the cloud, no modification, easy to get in, easy to get out. Decision optimal for people that, for example, are running hybrid clouds, multi-clouds, or are concerned about what would happen if the cloud provider were to raise their rates, which is almost everyone. So gives you a good in and good out, a fantastic way to do things. It uses the open source container management service, Kubernetes, and in this way, it's going to be a lot like ECS, but it's going to be industry standard, so you don't need to modify your containers and you can get on and off, so we love this solution. And like ECS, you can use Elastic Kubernetes Service in a serverless environment with Fargate or in an EC2 instance. So you can do it any way you like. So let's look at what this would look like, realistically speaking, and your options. So you see how you have your Elastic Kubernetes Service, and then you place your EKS containers somewhere, either on your EC2 instances or in your serverless environment. So we covered AWS Kinesis streams, which are never one of the more fun topics to talk about, but they are highly useful, so we have to talk about it. What we're going to do is we're going to open the forum to questions for 10 minutes before we move on to the next topic. I will let you, my team has told me that I should put a link to our Cloud Architect Career Development Program, a program that took us 20 years to build to help you find your first cloud architect job. I will drop a link to this program. Contains approximately 250 hours of cloud architect training, both technical, business, communication, interview training, and it contains everything that you need to get your first cloud architect job. I will drop a link to that program along with the 20% coupon code off and the link, and then I will open this up. Does anybody have any questions on anything we've covered so far this morning? Guys, I'd like to speak for about 20 minutes and ask you guys questions for about 10 minutes. Because I know what it's like to be in a class or watch a video and not be able to ask a question, and that's not a good experience. In our training, even our free training, will never be that way. So we want you to be able to ask questions. So if you've got any questions, please let me know and we'll answer it. Otherwise, we're always happy to get back to the training. K1 Erzin, that is hold on. Okay, so let me get to Akabooms first, K1. When setting up a container service on an EC2 instance, do you use a specific AMI or do you install the application on an instance? You could do it one of two ways. So if you're setting up a container service on an EC2 instance, if you're going to do it where basically you would just set up a bunch of EC2 instances and run Kubernetes yourself, like you would do on your data centers, you basically launch your Linux platform for Linux containers, or your Windows platform for Windows containers on an EC2 instance, and you would just set them up like you would do in your traditional data center. Or if you wanted to use the container service, you basically use a regular EC2 instance and you set up your container service with it. So you don't need any kind of specific AMI. Kubernetes is an open source an open source platform for you to do these kind of things. K1 Erzon, we're getting way outside of the Certified Solution Architect Professional by about 15 layers. So if you've got those kind of questions, you're inside of our Cloud Architect Career Development Program. We can work with those. Talking about those things would take a week if we wanted to do these things. I'm thrilled you're asking these kind of questions, but definitely won't be able to go back and forth and try and help you with these things in a chat window. But we can talk about this on one of our team calls, or Monday or Wednesday, and I'd love to do so with you. Who else has the next question? Anybody have any other questions before we go back? If not, we're going to go right back. Good point, K1 Erzon. What happens if the host crashes? Well, that's why I always prefer virtual machines over containers, because they're more secure and they're higher available. So, great architectural question. 1 is none, 2 is 1, and 3 is better than 2. So if you're going to do these kind of things on a single server, you're going to have to create multiple servers for your Kubernetes clusters, because that'll crash. The serverless environment, that's why they're also saying 99.99%, because hosts do occasionally crash. It's different to create a 4 nines versus a 5 nines network. So K1 Erzon, that is a really great question. You're going to need multiple hosts that are hosting the containers. Any others? Fejo, you don't install EC2 instances in a Kubernetes cluster. You create a Kubernetes cluster, which is software you install in an EC2 instance. To do that, go to the Kubernetes documentation. There's a step-by-step guide on how to do that. Or Fejo, since you're actually in our career development program, we actually have videos on how you can create containers. So feel free to follow any of those directions along the way. It's in the technical competency section. We have you creating containers. Why do we have you creating containers? Because if you want to work as a cloud architect, you must know the network and the data center, and containers are one of those critical things for you to know. How can you install EC2 on a container? Garless, Sammy, it's the exact opposite way. You take a container, you take a computer, and you install the Kubernetes service exactly like you would install any other application. You download the package and you install it. So if you're using AWS, all the container management is there. It's pre-set up for you to do it on an EC2 instance. But if you do it the way the rest of us do it, we're basically just create a Kubernetes cluster, and all of our things are taken care of on the cluster. And when we're doing it on a Kubernetes cluster, it manages availability and performance and to make sure systems go up and down the way they're supposed to. You take it, your Linux instance, and you install it just like you would install any other application. So if you had Linux and you wanted to install a Type 2 hypervisor like VMware ArcStation, where you download it and you install it, it's the same process for Kubernetes clusters, but it's a great question. You take the server and you install the container. Since the EC2 instance is basically a virtual machine, you just install it like your Kubernetes cluster like you would on any other virtual machine. Any more questions before we go to the next one? Okay, if I don't see any more questions, I'm going to get through this. Today we're kind of powering through a lot of the non-architecture things that are part of the AWS services environment. So in the beginning with networking and servers and works and load balancers, we really talked about how to architecturally design this. This is more the certification stuff, so we'll talk about architecturally speaking how it works, like we talked about the difference between a virtual machine and a container, and when we can't, can we save in serverless more than EC2, Ahmed? I'm not necessarily sure what you mean. Are you referring to save money? Typically speaking, it could be cheaper in a serverless environment than EC2. The downside of that, Ahmed, is you're not going to be able to move your things off of the serverless environment very easily should you want to go back to your data center or another cloud. So potentially cheaper serverless, potentially. Definitely a lot easier to manage because the AWS does most of the work for you. Okay, so let's get back to some content training here. The next thing we're going to talk about is Elastic Beanstalk. Now, again, I apologize. This section is a little hard to follow, but we really need to know it for the exam, and you actually need to know it if you're going to be working with AWS services. Now we're going to talk about Elastic Beanstalk. And Elastic Beanstalk is kind of a way to basically give you the tools to easily and simply deploy your infrastructure. And so, Ahmed, I answered your question, and we'll go back to this, that when it comes to using serverless, it may save cost. It may reduce the cost, but it also it will increase your simplicity, but it reduces your control. Meaning if it's cheaper to go serverless, but you want to get off of the cloud because the cloud provider were to raise your rates, you can't. So anytime you go serverless, you lose control, but it can potentially be cheaper. So it might potentially save you on cost. So let's go back to the Elastic Beanstalk. The Elastic Beanstalk is really a set of tools to basically help you deploy your infrastructure relatively easy. So for organizations that don't want to think about their architecture as much, which I would never recommend, but for organizations that realistically speaking don't want to think about their architecture as much and kind of just want it to be auto-deployed for them, they can use Elastic Beanstalk. Now, when something deploys things for you in an automatic or automagic sort of way, don't assume it's ever going to be as good as if you properly designed it, because things that happen automatically only work with things that are averages, and averages don't necessarily mean they're going to be optimal for your customer. So use extreme caution with these kind of automatic services. They will never, ever be as good as what you could do with proper design. So Elastic Beanstalk is a tool to simplify the automation. Basically what happens is you basically focus on your code, and it kind of takes care of a lot of these things. So you basically write your code in Go, Java, .NET, Node.js, PHP, Python, or Ruby, and then you put in your code, you upload your code, and Elastic Beanstalk is going to basically provision your systems for you. So this means you give a code and then it thinks it's going to give you what's in your best interest. So architecturally speaking, wouldn't be a decision I would do. I don't want control there, but it does simplify things, especially if you don't know what you're doing. It could be useful here. What does Elastic Beanstalk kind of look like? I can show you right here. Elastic Beanstalk, realistically speaking, you put in your code and it auto deploys, auto load balances, auto scaling your environment. So it does a relatively good job. And if you're a software developer and you don't know a lot about architecture and you want to use the cloud, this is an amazingly brilliant solution. Fantastic. But it's only useful in these environments. For me, I'd rather my architecture team design something perfect for the organization as opposed to letting it happen at random by uploading your code. But if you don't have a team of cloud architects working for your organization, this can be highly useful. So with everything we do architecturally speaking, we have to understand the benefits and the trade-offs. And that's all we're talking about here. It's just benefits and trade-offs. Important to know. So the next thing we're going to talk about is CloudWatch. So CloudWatch is a monitoring service to help you monitor AWS resources as well as the applications that you're deploying on AWS. So it's a logging service, and CloudWatch provides the metrics to monitor your performance. It's going to help you troubleshoot issues, and it can do a relatively good job at monitoring your applications that run on AWS. And it's got the concept of built-in metrics and custom metrics. And we'll talk about what those architecturally mean. The basic CloudWatch metrics that you get are not much. They're basically CPU utilization, disk read-write in terms of IOPS, and network utilization. That's it. So if you want to know what's going on with memory, for example, you're not getting it on basic CloudWatch default built-in metrics, but that's okay. You can set up CloudWatch custom metrics. A custom metric basically enables you to monitor memory, API performance, or many, many other things. So CloudWatch is a logging system. They would call it a notification system that would notify you to let you know if events are happening. So something's not good, inform you. Now, because you've got these informational alerts, you can do something pretty cool. For example, you can take a CloudWatch event, basically maybe the CPU is too high, and then use it to trigger a policy like auto-scaling. Or you could see a CloudWatch event that looks like something is going wrong security-wise, and you can trigger a Lambda function to go remediate it, or an SNS notification to notify you that something's wrong, go do something about it. So CloudWatch is a very useful tool. And when you're dealing with CloudWatch, you're dealing with basic two models. The version I told you, basic monitoring, which is simple, basic metrics. But you can also do basic monitoring and detailed monitoring. Now, basic monitoring is free. It's included with your account. And it basically gives you basic metrics every 5 minutes or so. Now, that's great. The thing is, when you start looking at things over a 5-minute trend, it's not necessarily easy to find problems when they occur. You might notice the CPU spikes at 100% for 3 seconds, and then it's 20% the rest of the time. And the farther your metrics are, the less likely you are to catch this. So if you need more information to basically design things, you need detailed monitoring. And detailed monitoring will basically let you send a message or an alert, or basically any kind of monitoring of your instances once per minute as opposed to once every 5 minutes. Now, if you're going to do this, if you want better CloudWatch metrics and data, you're going to pay more for it because it's detailed monitoring, so that's an additional charge. And you're going to have to enable it on the EC2 instance, otherwise you're not going to get that kind of information. So let's briefly talk about CloudWatch events. CloudWatch events are basically part of CloudWatch, but it's an alerting system. And I mentioned you can set up a rule to trigger another function. So CloudWatch events are really cool because they become aware of any operational changes when they occur. Excuse me, so CloudWatch will respond to these events and or help you take corrective actions. So automation of improvement of your environment, pretty darn cool. You love that. So if CloudWatch is monitoring, well, how do we audit the things that have been done? And when we audit, we're using CloudTrail. CloudWatch, logging, and CloudTrail, auditing. That's how you keep them apart in your head. So CloudTrail, again, is another serverless process, and it's still running on servers, but they call it serverless because you don't have to provision on a service. And it's basically going to provide an audit log that's going to help you with look at risk management, compliance, and this is really useful if you're in a regulated industry such as healthcare, banking. They want to have logs and logs and logs, and you can take these logs and you can store them for long periods of time. CloudTrail will basically track a change that's made by a user, a role, or a service, so you can know what's going on, how, where, and why. So CloudTrail is pretty terrific in terms of auditing things. So basically what will happen is you'll create a CloudTrail, and you'll do that in the console, the CLI, or the API, and then everything is going to be maintained for you. Now, what you'll see is an event history, which is going to literally let you see everything that's occurred inside of the last 90 days, which is fantastic. And if you want to store it longer term, you can pop it in an S3 bucket for long-term storage, and you have access to long records. You could conceivably even take these changes, stick them in Glacier Vault, and keep them for about 7 years to meet the kind of reporting requirements that healthcare, banking, or some other organizations would need. So when you're dealing with this, you basically create a trail. And there's 2 kinds of trails that you can create. You can create a trail that is local to a region, and a one region only CloudTrail is basically going to store everything into a single bucket. Now this is going to be the default option basically when you set up CloudTrail, and that's the way it's going to, whether you configure it via the API or the CLI, this is default to one region. Now if you need more logging or more auditing functionalities, that's okay. You basically create a trail and you apply that trail to all regions. So this gives you the most comprehensive options. It'll give you a record of events that occur everywhere inside of an organization's infrastructure. And this can help, correlate events by looking at things that go on one area and another area. So it's helpful because anytime you can correlate events and see what's going on, it can really help you fix some problems. So let's look architecturally at things like CloudTrail, what you'd see. You could have something coming from an IAM, an EC2 instance, or a database access. It's going to log it all, and you can stick it into an S3 bucket. So that's what CloudTrail is. CloudWatch, logging, Cloud CloudTrail auditing. So now we got to talk about another AWS service, and on this service we're going to talk about something called Config. Now, AWS Config is basically a service that's going to help you assess and audit your configurations in AWS. So it's going to give you an opportunity to see what changes were made and by whom. Again, this is probably a great way to audit things. See, what will happen is when you use AWS Config, when a change is made, AWS Config can send an alert to you via SNS that basically says, hey, but everybody, something's been changed. Do you want this to occur? And then if you did, great, but if you didn't, you can go fix it before you have an outage. So by using AWS Config, you basically get monitoring configurations against your policies. So you can set a policy of what you want your environment to look like according to your security policy, for example, which is awesome. And then after that, what you can do is you can make sure that an organization's environment adheres to the policy. So get an SNS alert, for example, every time somebody does something that you don't want to, and then go do something about it, go fix it. So this is pretty useful. So AWS Config will help you with change management because it can track the relationships with resources. If a change is made and you know what happened, you can see what actually happened. So that's pretty great. And you can integrate it with other environments, with CloudTrail, so you can track these kind of things. So how does config work? Basically, a configuration change is made. Config will note the change and record it in the same way every time. It'll then look and check to see if the change that was made adheres to the organization's policies. And at that point, config will notify the people, for example, that a change occurred, and to let you know if it's appropriate or not appropriate. So pretty useful kind of tool. Here's the way it looks architecturally speaking. You make a change, config notices it, and it records it, and therefore you're in a great environment. So the next topic we're going to talk about is a pretty important one, and we're going to talk about it with a little more depth. So could you delete your trail after 90 days, Rizwan? Of course you could delete your CloudTrail after the fact. But great question, Rizwan, and you've come so far in the last couple months, so pretty amazing things. So we're going to go talk about CloudFront next, and we're going to spend some time on this because content delivery networks are important. They really have the ability to really improve a website's performance, improve the security, improve scalability, and it's there. So that section is probably going to take a good 20 to 30 minutes to really talk about CloudFront the way I want to. So I will leave a link to our training because people pop in and out. I will leave a link to a coupon code in case anybody's interested in our training. Prior to getting to this next 20-minute section, I ask if there are any questions that anybody wants to ask quickly before moving on to CloudFront. And if there is, please let me know. And if there isn't, I'll go back on to CloudFront. But every time we go to major topics, I want to make sure we give you guys time to ask questions. If it looks like I'm sitting here, it's because there's approximately 30-second delay between me and the time you actually see it. If it looks like I'm quiet and waiting, that's the reason why. Absolutely, K1Rs, and you can use CloudWatch to log things going on with your EC2 instances in your services log. So exactly, that's the whole point. Great, great, great. Any others? Okay, if they're not, that is completely and totally fine. Nothing to worry about. Let's go back to CloudFront, which is something that I'm actually pretty passionate about talking about, content delivery networks. Cloud Cocktail. To join my course, simply do the following. Here is the link to the program. You can click that link. And here is a coupon code to help out with the price a little bit. All you have to do is register. And it does 2 links, and you will learn everything necessary to get your first cloud architect job. Certification is about 10% of the process. We cover the rest of the 90%. It takes about 10 to 15 hours to train someone for the Certified Solution Architect Professional. We have well over 250 hours of training in our Cloud Architect Career Development Program, so we can really help you get hired, help you learn how to negotiate a higher salary, get you paid more, and teach you all the skills to be competent, but not just competent and confident, have the ability and the knowledge to get promoted through your career, and have a competitive advantage over your competition by better communication skills, emotional intelligence, executive presence, presentation skills, and business acumen. All critical skills for the cloud architect. So now let's talk about CloudFront, and let's talk about content delivery networks. CloudFront is an Amazon branded, oh, and hi Divya, a content delivery network. And what is a content delivery network? A content delivery network is a way to basically improve the efficiency of your internet performance. And what's going on is, typically speaking, if I had a website just in the US and people all across the globe came to me, they'd be reaching me through the internet. Now, by reaching me through the internet, they would have to deal with internet routing, which is best effort, meaning there's no guarantee of your data being delivered. So internet performance is going to be very slow by comparison to private network performance. So if, for example, you wanted to ride across my network backbone, my performance is going to be great. Once my traffic leaves my backbone and goes somewhere else, do you know what's going to happen? If it's not on my network, I can't guarantee the speed and the performance. So because of this, organizations use content delivery networks. And what do content delivery networks do? I'll tell you as follows. Basically speaking, they create an environment where they have edge locations spread throughout the world. So for me, if I were to go to my local content delivery network is headquartered in Miami. So if I wanted to reach a web page that was hosted by a content delivery network, I'd leave Palm Beach, I'd hit my local spot in Miami. Now, hopefully the data will be cached in Miami and it would be sent directly back to me. But if it's not, and we'll talk much more about that, it'll go to the server. Now, when it goes to the server, it's not going to go to the server over the internet. It's going to rely on the high-speed backbone of the content delivery network. So basically, it gives me a chance to jump on the backbone of a private network to get better performance. And it does caching, and it does a lot of other things. So understand that content delivery networks improve performance, improve security, and they provide caching. So let's make sure we talk about content delivery networks. I actually saw, Derek, you actually popped a question after we started talking again. So at the next break, we'll answer your question and we will not forget it. So what is CloudFront? CloudFront is an Amazon branded content delivery network. And as I mentioned previously, a content delivery network is really a group of servers and network devices with a private backbone. Because of this, when you get on the content delivery network, it can improve your performance, but it can also reduce your bandwidth cost. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Basically, content delivery networks don't just provide you optimal information. They also do something called caching. And I'll show you what that means like in a few minutes. We'll graphically talk about it. The caching provided by the CDN can reduce your bandwidth costs and improve your performance. And I will show you what that means, but I just want to introduce the concept right now. Content delivery networks do a lot to improve your security, especially helping with DDoS protection, because content delivery networks will not forward bad requests to your web servers. They're going to stop at the edge of the content delivery network. So if you don't get the bad request, your reduction of your DDoS vulnerabilities go down. So it's a very great way to actually improve your performance. So content delivery networks can improve with performance, and occasionally they can also improve your availability. So let's say you've got a web server and you reboot the web server. While the web server is being rebooted, guess what happens? Everything else would be down. But if your content delivery network has been caching your things, they might still be sitting there. So when you reboot a web server, if you've got a CDN involved, you may actually still have some availability. So CDNs, think of it this way: security protection, reduction in bandwidth costs, improved use and experience for your users, improved security, and potentially improved availability. That's why I love content delivery networks. Akamai is a content delivery network. There's others. When you're dealing with AWS, you use CloudFront because that's their content delivery network, and it works great. So CloudFront, being a content delivery network, can really, really improve website hosting performance. And the way it works is AWS at their CloudFront edge locations, which is literally, I think there's 217 points of presence, so for the most part in every major city in the world, they have a network of caching servers. So what happens is when you make a web request, Your location is determined. How's your location determined? From your source IP address. It's very easy to figure out where you're coming from. So I leave my house in Miami, my source IP address, in Palm Beach, my source IP address is checked. Poof. Closest CloudFront edge location, Miami. Send Mike's traffic to Miami. Now, when I get to Miami, here's where the magic of the content delivery network happens. Let's say that I'm the first person today and I request a web page. I go to the CloudFront Content Delivery Network location in Miami. I pick up the web page. The Content Delivery Network does not have it in Miami. So what happens? The next thing that happens is a request is sent to the regional CloudFront cache. If it has it in its cache, it will send it. If not, the request to go straight to the server. After the server responds, it will ride the high-speed content delivery network backbone, and then it will go to the caching server in the Miami location. And guess what happens in the Miami location? It then sends it to me, but it stores my request. So when my neighbor next door goes to the same web page, he sends his request. It goes to the Miami Content Delivery Network session because it looks at his source address and sees that that's his closest location. And then the Miami cache has, Mike Gibbs already requested it. Let me send it to this person. Fast. That request never even goes back to the web server. And the next 1,000 people in the area where I'm at, in the next hour, they go to that same thing. Poof, they request it. Or 2 hours, or 3 hours, or 4 hours, or before the time to live expires. They all get the same data straight from Miami, and it doesn't have to cross the backbone or even go to the servers. So a content delivery network can really, really, really reduce load on your servers and improve your performance. Look at the latency difference. What if the web server was in the UK? The first request goes to the UK, but the second one goes from Palm Beach to Miami. It can be milliseconds, and what a website experience I could have. And also you could save on your bandwidth transfer charges. Remember, with AWS, every time any traffic leaves your region or goes to other regions, they charge you. So this, by going less transfer charges across regions, it could save you a lot of money and improve your performance. So content delivery networks are great. So let's look at what caching generally means. Let's say I've got my client over here, and I've got my client, and the client basically sends a web request. Let's say it's not there. So look at my first request. It goes to CloudFront. It goes to CloudFront, and when it goes to CloudFront, it's not there. So what does? It sends it to the source of the page, and the source of the page, for example, goes to let's say it's an S3 bucket. So I make a request, it's not there. My request rides the high-speed backbone to the content delivery network. The content, and then it goes to the original source, which is an S3 bucket. And then my request is sent from the S3 bucket to the CloudFront distribution back to me. Now the next request that go to the same CloudFront location for the same thing, goes straight to CloudFront and not more. So by being able to look at exactly how much performance you're getting, what's being gleaned from this is you're not sending it back to the service. So CloudFront can do lots of things to improve your performance. So let's talk about it. We talked about how it improves scalability with caching. We can talk how it makes a website more available by taking frequent requests off of it. We also talked about how if the website went down, if your content is cached, it might be available for a little bits of times. And we talk about how it can help with DDoS. So we still have a lot more to cover with CloudFront. I just wanted to get the fundamentals down first with you all. The good news is you can use CloudFront with a lot of your AWS services. So there's a couple ways you can do this. You can either use CloudFront to host your statically hosted website on S3. Now remember this, you may see this on an exam. If you're going to use CloudFront for a dynamic website, which is hosted on an EC2 instance, you must also use an elastic load balancer if you want to use CloudFront. So CloudFront for dynamic websites requires an EC2 instance plus a load balancer. If it's a static website, all you need to do is front end in an S3 bucket. CloudFront is often used to front end static websites. Like, what is a static website? People ask the question. If it's just my website and it's me and a bunch of pictures and it doesn't change, it's static. Host that thing with S3. It's simple, it's elegant, it's cheap, and use CloudFront in front of it. What if I've got dynamic content and things going in and going out? That's dynamic. So I need to host that on an EC2 instance, put a load balancer in front of it, and use CloudFront. What if you have both? Use the static content server from S3. It's the cheapest and it works great for this. And then use the dynamic in front of a load balancer, which is in front of an EC2 instance. So now you get kind of the concept of CloudFront. So let's look at CloudFront. So you've got your user, and basically it's pulling static information from an S3 bucket, and it's pulling dynamic information from the EC2 instances that are sitting behind the load balancers. Architecturally speaking, that's what it's going to look like. So before I switch slides, my team has informed me that I should ask you to, if you're enjoying the video, to like the video, and or leave a comment on the video, to subscribe to the channel, and or share this video with others. So thank you so much for that, guys and girls. Now let's go back to talking about CloudFront. There are 3 concepts to understand with CloudFront, and they are absolutely essentials for you to understand how to set it up and design it and configure it. And Cloud Cocktail will answer your question. It's the career development program. That's the only program that I'm typically recommending, but I'll answer your question soon. I'll tell you what both programs are. So when you're setting these things up, you're basically going to have to set up something called a distribution, an origin, and a cache control. And I want to tell you what these things are because they're essential for your knowledge of understanding how it works. So first, when you set up CloudFront, you have to set up your distribution, and your distribution is identified by a DNS name. Now let me tell you, your distribution name is going to be the ugliest thing you can possibly imagine. And if you do an NS lookup at Amazon.com and you look at their 1,000,001 character CloudFront distribution name, you're going to say, oh my God, this is really ugly. And that actually becomes the new name for your website. So that is your CloudFront distribution. But who's going to tolerate a website that's got like this abcd12344272964.cloudfront.net something something something? You're nobody. So what you're going to do is, when you're using CloudFront and you get one of these ugly new URLs for your website, you're going to set up a CNAME record that's going to point the user-friendly URL to here, and then people will go to the www.gocloudarchitects.com and they'll get redirected to the name of the CloudFront distribution, and it will be simple, simple, simple for you to use. Now the next thing we need to talk about is the origin. And what is the origin? The origin is where your content's coming from. So pointing to the S3 bucket, your EC2 instance, or the load balancer of your website. The origin is going to point to the DNS name of these locations. So just remember that. The next thing to understand when you're working with these kind of things is cache control. So what is cache control? If we put information in the cache and the cache never times out, let's say I update my Go Cloud Architects page today, and I have a cache. If the cache would never time out, as soon as my stuff would get sent to the caching server, it would stay there forever, which means that users would always get that page. Now, what if I changed my page? Users would still see the old page because the information in the cache was still serving the old one. So when we're dealing with caches, we have to have a timeout, which is called the TTL, or time to live. Typically speaking, if you do nothing, CloudFront caches your data for 24 hours, which is typically great because that means once a day your content will be refreshed. So new changes get there, but your web servers really get a huge reduction in workload. And because of that, people love this. So you can change it to 24 hours, but realistically speaking, 24 hours is great. It really does a lot of reduction in your server workload, provides DDoS protection, faster speeds, reduced transfers, all great things. But what if you were to change your website every 3 hours? Well, then your cache would have to be every 3 hours. So your TTL needs to be based upon how frequently you change your information. So, of course, when you're dealing with caching, there's times where the cache gets corrupt. You can always clear the cache if you ever needed to. There's a command to do so. The command to do so I will paste into the window over here. That's how you would clear the cache if you ever had to. Keep that command around. So how do you set it up? You set up your servers, create your distribution, you assign a DNS name, and then you either accept the ugly name, which I wouldn't recommend ever, ever, ever. I would use I'd create a CNAME record, and then everything will be user-friendly. And of course, after you set up the distribution, AWS will provision it for you. let's look at this architecturally speaking, what it looks like. So here, if you remember what I talked about on the first day, I talked about the structure, organization, and the layout of the cloud. So you've got this big giant area called a region. And inside of these regions, you've got these availability zones, which are just data centers. They just come up with complicated terms, and all the cloud providers use these complicated terms. But then you have what's called the edge location. The edge location is where your users are going to access their CloudFront distribution. That's an edge location. So let's look at this even further. So here's my user. User wants to access a website. User does a www.gocloudarchitects.com request. It hits their source IP address is verified. It redirects them to their closest CloudFront delivery edge location, which in my case would be Miami. And then if it's cached there, it sends it right back to me. And if it's not cached, it goes to the regional cache, and then it goes back to the sources. And then provided back, and then it sits and then it gets cached in the edge location, and then subsequent users don't have to look it up again. And realistically speaking, that is the way these things sort of work. Now, let's talk about some last minute tuning things that you can do this. And then after CloudFront, I saw there were several questions and I promised to answer them at all. Now, typically, people use CloudFront for their public websites. But what is the difference between a public website and a private website? Exposure to the internet. Organizations often run intranet or internal network applications that are web-based. Why? Because if you're running a web-based application, you don't have to install applications on users' desktops. You've got a Linux user, a Mac user, a Windows user. It all works in a browser. You're not doing software patches or upgrades. So people have external-facing websites that are designed to be publicly accessed on the internet. And realistically speaking, they've got private websites or intranets, and they're structured very similar, but they're not. So if you want to use CloudFront on your internal sites, you can do that as well. Basically speaking, you're just going to have to restrict access to the content of certain individuals, like paid web subscribers or private applications, and there's means to do this. And the way you would do this for internal or private content, or actually usually external content, but it could be done for private things, but you have to be very careful on it, and that's beyond the scope of this. But let's just say for paid website subscribers or private applications, you'd set up a CloudFront distribution, but you restrict access to certain places. And the way you do that is you set up what's called an origin access identity, and you typically restrict the content to certain individuals, or to assign URLs, or to assign cookies. So private content with CloudFront, you can still use it to accelerate your performance. The next thing that I would say for you to understand is the pre-signed URL concept. Now, we talked about pre-signed URLs, but I'm going to talk about it one more time. When you're dealing with, if you want to give someone easy access to something, say for example in an S3 bucket, you can send them what's called the pre-signed URL, which is basically meaning you're signing with your own unique keys, and it makes it easier for people to understand. Again, with pre-signed URLs, we talked about them before, but if you create it with an IAM instance profile, it's good for 6 hours. If it comes from the token service, it's good for 36 hours. If you create an IAM user base, it's good for up to upwards of 7 days. And if you create a temporary token, it's until it expires. So we're almost done with CloudFront. CloudFront, as I mentioned before, can make a big impact in your website performance because it caches your content. It's globally reachable. 217 points of presence of the CloudFront edge locations from the time we wrote this course. And it really improves your routing efficiency because you're using the AWS backbone of their content delivery network and not the internet, which is best effort delivery. CloudFront will, realistically speaking, maintain persistent connections to the source, which is really great. So if you're pointing to the CloudFront distribution, it doesn't need to make a session every time with the server, further reducing server load. So CloudFront can really offload your servers quite a lot. Since CloudFront can integrate with WAP and Shield, it can help with DDoS protection, and Shield Standard is included with no cost. It can help with DDoS attacks because it will distribute the request through multiple points of presence instead of a single one. And only legitimate requests are going to be pointed towards the servers. Because only legitimate requests are going to be pointed towards the servers, the servers are not going to be working as hard because they're not going to be seeing bad requests. And realistically speaking, like that. So CloudWatch can provide, so CloudFront will basically really help with things. So CloudFront can enforce your SSL or TLS policy and even terminate it right there. Can work with your certificate manager for services, and it will support server name identification and custom services. So we talked a lot about CloudFront. I'm going to open it up to some questions. There are two questions that I see. The first question that I see directly in front of me is from Cloud Cocktail, and I think there's another question that Dave had texted me so make sure we answer it. So Cloud Cocktail, I sent you a link to the course as well as a coupon. I'm going to drop that again. The difference between the Cloud Architect Experience Program and the Cloud Architect Career Development Program is substantial. The Cloud Architect Career Development Program has live training and live lectures twice a week where we focus on architecture. The Cloud Architect Career Development Program doesn't just focus on technology. It has all of the technical components in the experience program, but all the other things necessary for being a cloud architect. We cover business skills, we cover emotional intelligence, presentation skills, writing skills, interview skills, negotiation skills, everything necessary. Yesterday we had a hiring manager from AWS come and show up on our team call. He wanted to tell everyone exactly how important he felt soft skills and emotional intelligence is. He thanked me for training this to the community, and he told me how important it is for find cloud architects for doing it, and thanked me for elevating the community by making it clear that certification training is not enough. You must know how the cloud works, you must know how the network works, you must know how the data center works. You must be able to present it to executives as well as engineers and architects, all the way from the CEO all the way to the most critical engineer. They liked that. That's why they came on the call to talk to our students. In our training program, we have 100 hours of live instructional training where we do architectures. We do live presentation training. We have our students present, write. I even have my students writing books with me to get them known as industry experts. So 100 hours of live training. And then we have about 50 hours of AWS training for solution architect roles, which are much more junior than the cloud architect roles we prepare people for. But we know sometimes your first job may have to be a solution architect. So because of that, we have about 50 hours of AWS training for solution architect roles. We have 100 hours of live architecture training, and we have approximately another 50 hours of video training inside of these programs. And the video training is focused on soft skills, emotional intelligence, presentation skills, but also networking and all the underlying technologies that make the cloud possible. In all of our trainings, we do the following, and then I'm going to get back to answering real questions related to the content, not related to our business. I'm thrilled you actually asked. We have our students literally build every piece of technology that makes the cloud possible, because you can't design what you don't understand. So we have our students set up server virtualization, build containers, literally firewalls. To learn IAM, what they actually do is they build Active Directory servers. We literally do everything that's necessary to teach our students how the cloud works. And then when we're done, we even have our students build their own cloud. So after you built a cloud, you know how the cloud works. Plus, when you put building a cloud on your resume, it really shows the hiring manager a lot of things they care about. Somebody can say, I set up an EC2 instance, which an 8-year-old can do, and I do it all the time. I have a cute little 8-year-old configure my EC2 instances when I make my YouTube videos with that, because I think it's really cute. She clicks a couple boxes in the management console and she says, EC2. And let me tell you, an 8-year-old with pigtails clicking EC2 is really cute and fun to watch. So basically, that's the way we structure our training. So you ask some questions, that's realistically how we work. Now, there's some other questions that Derek asked. So who is responsible to respond to logs and events? That is a great question. Who is responsible is based upon who the organization determines who is responsible. For example, typically speaking, you have a cloud architect who designs something, a cloud engineer that builds something, and then a sysops team that maintains it. So the sysops people may be the people that actually get the alerts that say, go fix this thing from CloudWatch. But it can also go to the management team. They'll probably also be notified. And if it's a security thing, it could also go to the security team. So depending upon the severity and depending upon the notification, Derek, it could literally go to everybody from the CEO down, if it's something serious, or it could go straight to the security team or straight to the IT team. So it's really dependent upon how big of, for example, if you've got a massive outage due to a security hack, the CEO is going to be involved, the CIO is going to be involved, the Chief Information Security Officer, all the engineers and tech are all going to be involved. By comparison, if it's just something small that needs to be notified, like the CPU of a system hit 70%, that's probably going to go to a sysops team. So these are the kind of things that would I'd want you to kind of be able to look at these kind of things. So that would be sort of my recommendation. And Cloud Cocktail, I'm thrilled to answer your questions. I love to. I just want to make sure I answer them. So type in your question and I'd be thrilled to answer it. So realistically speaking, that's with regards to who's going to be responsible. Now, while I'm waiting for Cloud Cocktail to ask his next question, does CloudFront reduce cost because a web page request didn't hit the secure web server? Derek, you're partially correct. The reason CloudFront reduces cost is the following, Derek. First, AWS charges you anytime data leaves your region. So if you've got your website hosted in Ohio and somebody in California would request it, AWS is going to charge you inter-region transfer charges. So by using CloudFront, if someone in San Francisco goes and requests the web page, yes, that will incur an inter-region transfer charge because it's inter-region. But the second request may not need to go to the web server, so it will reduce region transfer charges. And Derek Houston, it also reduces the number of requests that actually have to hit the server, and because of that you need smaller servers. So reduced inter-region transfer costs as well as reduced server cost. That's how CloudFront actually reduces your cost, Derek. So I hope I answered your two questions. And Cloud Cocktail, it looks like you have another question, so if you'd like to answer that question right now, we'd love to answer it. Cloud Cocktail, if you want to let me know your last question, I'm thrilled to answer it. I just want to make sure I answer all the technical questions along the way so it doesn't just become about my business, but I'm thrilled to answer any questions. I'll give you a few more seconds, Cloud Cocktail. And of course, Cloud Cocktail, if any one of you have any questions about my training program, my team informed me this is the last week that I'm actually, I don't have to. Cloud Cocktail, I've taken many people. For example, in the last 12 weeks, 100 students who joined with me. My program is 16 to 20 weeks. 9 of my students have already gotten positions, and several of them have never worked in technology in their entire life. All positions want experience. They're not looking for experience per se. What we're looking for is competency. So we train competency, and we give labs that teach people how to be competent. So yes, it's completely possible, just like I went from practicing medicine to working as a senior architect almost overnight, and my first job was a senior network engineer role with the world's largest internet service provider at the time. Yes, you can do it. We have a method which we talk about in our Monday and Thursday calls. The method to getting your first cloud architect job when you have limited experience is as follows. First and foremost, make yourself look so good on paper. How do you look on paper? You get the kind of experience that cloud architects need, such as the network and the data center, and that's what we teach in extensive ways, the network and the data center, because the cloud is a network and a data center. And then we have you build every technology that makes it possible, and then we actually have you build a cloud. That's just one of the many ways that we do it. But understand whether this way you're taking art training or just learning how to get your first cloud architect job on your own. When it comes to interviews, 50% of your score that will rate you is related to your technical competency. 50%. But the remaining 50% is related to your soft skills, your emotional intelligence, your presentation skills, your attitude, your energy, your enthusiasm. So we train that because we find with new people, it's easy to get you to a 45 or a 50 out of 50 on the intangible skills, the soft skills. And we also find that we can get you to a 35 out of 40 out of the technical competency capabilities, which gives you a score of about 85 to 90. Now, I will tell you, after the last 5,000 people that I interviewed, someone that scores above an 80 is the top 1% that you're ever going to deal with. So what we do is we basically polish you up in every way, shape, or form. We teach you what needs to be on your resume, what hiring managers want. We help you get exactly the certifications to fill in the gaps in your resume. And we teach you exactly what you need to know, nothing more, exactly what you need to know. And then we have you focused on getting that kind of expertise and then learning how to explain things in interview. Because, if you get an interview, it's your opportunity and you should be hired. One person should never, ever need to go on more than 3 interviews with 3 different companies to get a job. If the person has been on more than 3 interviews, there is a problem. And even the hiring manager from AWS agreed with me yesterday. If a qualified person goes on more than 3 interviews, there's something wrong, either related to technical competency, interview skills, or communication skills. So if it's been more than 3 interviews and you've got the skills and you're qualified, something's missing. Those are the things to focus on. Train with us, train on your own. I wanted to make sure I answered those questions. I am so happy to hear that you feel confident with these Certified Solution Architect exams, Associate Professional. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Anything that we can do. I actually was asked by a lot of people, they like networking, so people had asked for some networking training, so comment network training if you want some live network training. I'm one of the original Cisco certified internet experts. I've consulted to the design of most of the world's largest internet service providers, as well as largest global banks, as well as healthcare organizations. If you guys want networking training, you type network training, and I'll do a free YouTube Live, and I may even do a completely free AWS Advanced Networking course if you want, about 4 weeks from now. If there's enough demand, let me know in the comment selection, and if enough people here and others request it, I will do a completely free AWS Advanced Networking course at some point in the future. Let's go back and talk about some cool tech stuff. And Cloud Cocktail, if you have any questions, you know how to reach me. Since I believe, well, actually, you guys know how to reach me. And if you've got any questions or are curious about anything, let me know. I'd be thrilled to work with you all. So let's now talk about Lambda functions. So there are times when serverless things really make sense, and there are things when serverless things don't really make sense. And let me tell you where they do make sense. Lambda functions are absolutely awesome. Lambda is a serverless computing system designed for simple automation. Because it's serverless, when you're dealing with Lambda, there's basically nothing to run on. It's all run on their servers, and you don't even have to think about it. So it's fully managed. And because Lambda is fully managed, there's no servers. Basically what happens, you upload your code and it just works. So you can realistically use C#, Go, Java, Node.js, or Python. These are the types of languages that are supported by Lambda functions. And realistically speaking, what they enable you to do is simple things. So you upload your code, a Lambda function runs, and you pay for the function to run, and that's it. So what is Lambda? Lambda is basically a stateless function serverless environment. Upload your code and it runs it. Where would you use Lambda functions? If you've got an environment where you want to do some automation or improve your efficiency, this is where you use Lambda. It enables you to process your data across multiple systems, remediate things across security events, patch your operating systems. Look at it this way. CloudWatch event we just talked about basically says something's wrong. Lambda function, go fix it. Elegant, simple, can improve your security posture as well as the availability of your systems. So Lambda can run as a response to an event. So basically it can trigger an SNS function, like to notify you, an email. It can do a lot of different things to help automate things. So that's realistically what Lambda is. Very functional thing. Let's look about architecturally and some of the use cases in the environment. Let's say, for example, let's take a video use case that's something that I would use all the time. Let's say I would upload a video to, say, S3. Let's say I create a Lambda function, for example, that once the video is uploaded, to say basically send an email to my video editor, for example. And from here, it might optimize the video, take it from uncompressed video to basically compress it down with an H.264 or an H.265 codec to reduce the size of it. And then I might even want to have it transcribed. I can do all these things with Lambda functions to kick off an additional service. Now, since we talked about Lambda functions being used to automate things, when we're talking about CloudFront, we also have the opportunity to do a Lambda at Edge function. So what's that going to look like? In a Lambda at Edge function, what we can do is we can basically run a Lambda function very close to the user, and it basically is going to run on the CloudFront Content Delivery Network close to the user, so think edge locations. It's going to be like anything else. You upload your code, it'll trigger a CloudFront thing, runs the code close to the user. But just understand, Lambda Edge is a Lambda function working with CloudFront. Let's talk about some more things. Let's talk about step functions. Step functions provide a way for you to sequence multiple Lambda events. Remember I previously said a Lambda function is stateless. Basically, it has no knowledge or intelligence of what's going on. It does its thing and finishes, and that's it. So what if you wanted to run multiple Lambda functions? Perfect. Lambda function 1, Lambda function 2, Lambda function 3, Lambda function 4. A lot like that simple workflow solution we were kind of talking about, but you can do it with Lambda functions. So step functions provide a means for you to schedule it. So how do you set up step functions? You design the steps of the application, you create your individual Lambda functions, and you configure the workflow for the steps functions. So build them and then configure the steps. You'll connect your workflow components to the individual tasks of the Lambda functions, and then your functions will be executed. Simple, and elegant. Really kind of terrific. So when you start looking at some of these kind of things, step 1, Lambda function, step 2, Lambda function, step 3, Lambda function. You get the concept all the way through. You can synchronize your Lambda functions with step functions. So now let's talk about another service called recognition. Like I said, this was this chapter, and is one of those harder chapters to cover because there's so much content, but you could be tested on this. And you also do know, as an architect, you need to know the names of the services. What are the services? How do the services work? So you can figure out how to put them in the architectural design. As an architect, you're not going to be spending a lot of time configuring these things, but you're sure going to be spending a lot of time designing them. And if you're going to design these things, you need to know how they work. So the next service we're going to talk about is AWS Recognition, or Amazon Recognition. It's realistically a way to Amazon analyze videos and images using machine learning. So look at it this way. Let's say you're a video provider like me, and you want to analyze your videos. You want to look for certain people in the video, or you want to see if people are happy in the video, or you want to see if unprofessional content in the video is there. You can do this with recognition. Look for a certain person in a video. Maybe there's an image or a logo that I want there or don't want there. I can search all of this with recognition. Basically, recognition is an AWS managed service that uses machine learning to look through video and give you good information. So that's what AWS Recognition is. The next thing we're going to talk about is one of those sysops things, and maybe even some cloud engineering things, not so much of a cloud architect thing, but it's called CloudFormation. CloudFormation is basically a way where you're going to template a known good configuration of your service and then launch these things in an easy basically scripting environment. So let's say you've got a lot of servers that need the same setup, the same boot, the same operating system, the same level patching. CloudFormation templates are a great way to do it. You build a template, and then you upload your template to S3, and then the CloudFormation template is going to do its thing, and it's going to form your services. So great way for you to do it. Now, how do you do it? You basically create these things. It needs some code, either in JSON format or YAML format. Like YAML templates are typically what you guys use for containers. JSON is typically what you use for IAM, but this works with either. Basically, you take your code, you store it in S3, and you use the code from the CloudFormation by the console, the CLI, or the API. And CloudFormation is going to provision your systems based upon your template, and then everything's going to be up and running. So that's realistically speaking what CloudFormation is. So Portia, confirm. Step functions are for orchestrating multiple Lambda functions, yes, and workflows to orchestrate many things that happen. A great perception, and yes, you've got it. Going through the AWS services, we'll talk about the AWS Certificate Manager. And yes, there are so many of these services to cover in this section, apologies. The Certificate Manager is a service that will manage your SSL or TLS certificates in the AWS cloud. It's just their certificates environment where you get your servers. So the Certificate Manager is going to add protection to your website by enabling you to use an SSL certificate to provide SSL TLS-based communications. So the Certificate Manager will make it much simpler for you to provision, manage, or deploy your technologies. And realistically speaking, the Certificate Manager will enable you to basically get things set up and resolved quickly. So when you're using the Certificate Manager, there's going to be free public ones and paid private ones, and we'll talk about those things. What does the Certificate Manager, realistically speaking, look like? You've got your user. You've got your certificate manager, and then you basically pull your SSL or your TLS certifications for the load balancer, which could be used for your instances behind that, or basically you could use it for your CloudFront distribution. So you put your certificate here, and it does the SSL termination on the load balancer or the CloudFront. It doesn't even have to go back to the web server. How wonderful is that? Further reducing the load of the encryption on your web servers. So if you want to see what that looks like, the certificate manager, here's visually speaking what it looks like. You go to the certificate manager, and it puts your certificates where you need them to provide some secure and encrypted training. Secure and encrypted communication via certificates. So when we talk about this and the certificate manager, really have two options. So for most people, what they're going to use is the standard certificate manager, and they're going to get a certificate and they're going to deploy it for their load balancers, CloudFront, API gateways in order to make communication secure with SSL or TLS. This is traditionally speaking a public certificate. Now there are times where internally inside of an organization where you desire to do certain things, like actually use SSL TLS inside of your organization. And for that, there's the private CA solution. And this is really designed for communication within an organization. And this is something you can purchase from AWS. These certificates are private, meaning they can't be used on the public internet, and they're available for an additional cost. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is a couple of functions that are designed to enhance the security of your cloud environment. The first one is Amazon Guard Duty. And Amazon Guard Duty is a service that monitors your AWS accounts, and it's going to analyze your CloudTrail, your DNS logs, your VPC flow logs. It's going to look for patterns of behavior that are identified with compromised systems. So algorithmic, looking at it is as good as if not. And if it sees something that it doesn't like, it'll send a CloudWatch event, which case you can use that to trigger something like a Lambda function to remediate it, or you can get notified. So that's what Amazon Guard Duty does. Now next on the list, we'll talk about Amazon Inspector. And Amazon Inspector is really a highly automated security assessment service that can help you improve your security by looking to see if things meet your compliance standards. And Amazon Inspector automatically assesses for applications for exposure vulnerabilities, maybe deviations from best practices. So what happens is after you're performing an assessment, Inspector will basically produce a detailed list of security findings by a priority level, and it will basically use that to help you make decisions. Again, these are automated things. Automated things send a lot of artifact, meaning things that are not real, but also things that are real. So you're going to have to use your judgment as an architect to determine if the information it's giving you is correct or not. Amazon Inspector will really help you look for unintended things like network access or things. So it's a really great thing to use in your environment. Next thing we'll talk about is Amazon Macie, which is a fully managed data security and data privacy service that uses machine learning and pattern matching to discover what's going on. So now we're starting to work up the food chain in terms of the capabilities. And you're using machine learning. So Macie will look and provide an inventory of your S3 buckets, for example, what's unencrypted, what's publicly accessible, and that way you have a problem. Now, mind you, 16% of all hacks, as the most recent statistic on AWS, actually occur from misconfigured S3 buckets, and that is a lot of attacks. So this is a great thing to be able to look for that and help secure it. And then Macie will use the machine learning patterns to basically have you identify things that don't look right, protect your sensitive data, and look for alerts. Now, thankfully, we got through these AWS services. Our next thing we're going to talk about is cost management for a few minutes, and then after that, we're going to talk about building high availability systems, which is something that I absolutely love talking about because I've spent 25 years building these high availability systems. And before we get to that, I think it's time to open for some more questions. So who has any technical questions, business questions, training questions, whatever you like? If you guys can let me know in the comment section. I have time to answer all your questions today. We're making great time. So please let me know, Cloud Cocktail, if I didn't answer all your questions. I'm happy to answer more. Portia, I want to make sure we answered your questions. So if anybody's got any questions, let me know now. And then what we'll do, or Derek, if you've got any more questions, or anyone for that matter, we'll answer your questions, and then we'll go back to training. you guys like our content, if you don't mind leaving a like or sharing our videos with others, it helps our channel grow. And we're going to do a lot of free networking training coming up soon because lots of people have requested it. So if you're that. Now, if you're having fun, please type Cloud Architect in the box so we know you're enjoying it, because we want to know that everybody's having a good time. Are there any more questions before we get into costing? Okay, that question. Okay, is AWS Telecom a specialized architecture? Derek, it's a great question. So, sort of and not really. When you're dealing with the cloud, you're dealing with a couple of different careers. You're realistically speaking with a cloud infrastructure architect like me, and that's a cloud architect which has got an extreme depth of knowledge in networking, and networking is routers and switches and remote access connections, which is telecom. So cloud infrastructure, it's a specialty. And I think you should all pick a specialty if you actually want to have a great cloud computing career, especially for your first job. Pick something and master it. So cloud infrastructure, Derek, a guy like me, basically a CCI routing and switching person that's also working on the cloud, focusing on cloud networking. And Letitia, great question. And I'll definitely tell you that in 2 minutes, as soon as I finish Derek's question. So then you can have a generic cloud architect, which basically focuses on the design of systems. That includes basically the network and the data center. That's predominantly what they do. Then you have a cloud application architect, which is someone that designs designs architecture for the cloud on the application side of it. Then you have a cloud IAM architect, which is someone that focuses on IAM. Then, for example, you have some DevOps people in your team that focuses on the software development lifecycle. You'll have some application people that are coding. You'll have some cloud engineers that are going to build on your team. You can have some cloud sysops people that are going to maintain on your team. You're never going to be in an isolated environment as a cloud architect. There's going to be a big team around you. So that's realistically speaking. So I hope I answered your question there, Derek, and you'll soon be a cloud architect. Lushita Tech, how many hours each week for your training program? What is the mode of training? What a great question. So we use a hybrid model for training. So the way our training works is we do live instruction via Zoom twice per week for 2 to 3 hours each time. Then during the week, we have students watch our HD videos that are inside of our learning portal. And during the week, not only do they do their watch the HD videos, we actually have a tremendous number of homework assignments for people to do, for which we give feedback. We have a very extensive Slack group to provide really optimal communication that was built by my team. I had 2 full-time data scientists that put this together, and they both spent about a month putting together a really great Slack channel. So we do that. So students submit their assignments via our Slack channel, and in the Slack channel, basically we provide feedback and communication. So live lessons, which we record in case you can't be there, plus video lessons. Plus there are labs, and we have a lot of labs, and all the labs get done on our servers. These labs are where you, literally speaking, build every component of the cloud, and then after that you actually build the cloud, and then we use case studies and we make sure you design the systems on the cloud. Twice per week we do these architecture discussions calls, and during these calls we have our students design an architecture for a very complicated environment. So all of our students on our calls are designing things that people would, if they had 5 and 10 years experience, would do. And that way when they go to the hiring managers, they're there. Last couple people that we've got great success. Once we get people on an interview, they're likely to get hired because they know exactly how to interview what hiring managers desire. So we also have a large network of about 60 recruiters, which we use to help people. We make no guarantees because they're our recruiters, but we definitely use our recruiters to help you find your job. So I hope I answered your questions. Realistically speaking, we like to say that the average person should spend 10 hours a week studying in the program to be successful. Letitia Tech, I hope I answered your questions. Do you have any more questions for me, Letitia Tech? And anybody that does, this is the last week I'm allowed to do this, but I'm actually providing my phone number in case anybody has any questions. Arona, what other specialties between networking? So you've got networking, you've got security, you've got applications, you've got IAM, you have specialty DevOps, which isn't really necessarily an architect, which is an engineer. You've got sysops, which is an engineering role. You have DevOps. You have cloud data scientists, which are data scientists on the cloud as another specialty. You have, I'm drawing a blank right now because we're thinking about it live, but basically speaking, you have a tremendous number of types, Ariana. Before we go into reducing cost, does anybody else have any more questions? Okay, I'm going to wait because there's about a 30-second delay to see if you guys have any more questions. And if not, we're going to get back to content. But if you have questions, I always want to answer them. Okay, if there's no more questions, I'll get back to speaking in the... Oh, we got one. Yes, for cloud architect, typically think a generic cloud architect, a cloud application architect, a cloud data science kind of person, a cloud security person, and a regular cloud architect. I'd say they're the majority of them. Louisa, are you guys focusing on AWS alone? Okay, so Lucia Tech, AWS alone is nowhere close to enough to become a cloud architect. You have to learn the cloud, and you have to be able to work with every other cloud as well. So while we do provide about 50 hours of specific AWS training in our program, every week we have our students get together and we give them architectural case studies. The case study is exactly the way it would work in real life. Normally the cloud architect is going to meet with an executive, they're going to ask a bunch of questions, and then they're going to ask the technical team from the organization. So I present as the executive, and I have the team ask me the questions, and then they design the architecture. Now they design an architecture. So an architecture is not the name of a service, an architecture is an architecture. So the way cloud architects work in real life is, let's say you meet with the client, you meet with the CEO, they tell you their business strategy, the CIO tells you their technology strategy to meet the CEO's needs, and so realistically speaking, so there's that, and then you meet with the tech team to design these things. So that's realistically speaking the way that the process works. After you design that, then you say, okay, I need this many servers, I need this kind of network performance, I need this kind of security. And then after that, then you pick the name of the cloud services. So our people always on every call and every architecture always use a minimum of 2 clouds. And our students can work on any cloud, anywhere, anytime, because not only they build an OpenStack Ansible cloud, which is one of the primary clouds used by enterprises now, and it's the IBM focus, they can work on GCP, they can work on Azure, they can work on AWS, and they could go to Oracle all at a moment's notice. And I have students working in every one of these clouds from our training. So Letitia, I hope I answered you that. Do you try for cloud engineer roles after my training? I wouldn't. I would start with a cloud architect role. You could obviously do a cloud engineer. Our training will prepare you for both. Cloud engineers basically work twice as many hours as cloud architects for half of the pay. So if you desire to be a cloud engineer, we can definitely get you there. And often people have to take a cloud engineer role as their first job if their soft skills or emotional intelligence are a little weak. But and we can get you straight to be a cloud architect, we prefer to do that, because cloud engineer roles think double the number of hours and half the pay, and much less career growth in terms of getting promoted and paid throughout your career. So we try to focus on architecture first, not engineers. But for the people that love engineering, look, I worked as an engineer for a while and we can do that too, but we're not trying to build you a certification. We're trying to build you a long-term, highly successful, highly lucrative career, and that's why we focus on the architecture certification and the architecture training, not just certification. I hope I answered your question there, Letitia. And of course, if you have any questions, you can reach out to me. I listed my number in the chat box. As well as my team has told me I should put a link to my training program again, and because they message me constantly to tell me what I'm supposed to do, I just do the teaching and the coaching. The rest of these things are managed by people that are far smarter than me. I love to coach people and I love to teach, and I know exactly how to help people get hired because I've done it for I've been in this tech for 25 years and I've been coaching others for 2 decades now. Yes, of course. You can learn how to configure the services and do them, but architects don't actually do configure services. Architects design, cloud engineers do that. Will you be able to do that? Of course, because our AWS training includes the associate level, which is where we teach the hands-on skills, and the professional level, which includes more of the design skills, and you'll be hands-on with the Linux and all these other skills that are necessary that would enable you to work for AWS too. In fact, AWS sent a representation on my call yesterday because they like what we do and they like our training model and they desire to hire a fair number of our students because we focus on all the other critical things that are not included in the certification training programs. So I hope I answered your questions. If you have any more questions, I'm happy to go back to them, but let's get back into cost management. So we can talk about that. But Letitia, if you have other questions, either call me, text me, or you can or answer them on the next break, because I want to make sure, Lucia, we get your answers, your questions answered. So let's talk about moving to the cloud and its impact on an organization's costs. So when you move to the cloud, it can have a profound effect on an organization's cost. It theoretically should have a lower total cost of ownership, meaning over the long term, theoretically it should cost less. But having said that, understand it should cost less, but it doesn't have to. And the way you design your architecture will have a massive, massive, massive impact on the way your costs are structured. Moving to the cloud will change the cost structure completely. See, in the data center, you buy the tech and then you use it. In the cloud, you pay for everything, every minute, every second, every hour. So traditionally speaking, it's a capital intensive or spend to buy stuff for traditional environments. And it's operational expense or OPEX when you're using the cloud. So CAPEX, capital expense when you purchase, operational expense to maintain it. Moving to the cloud reduces your capital expenditures dramatically, because you don't have to buy a lot of things. But your operational costs on the cloud go sky high really fast. So the way you design it is going to be the determination of how successful you'll be in terms of maintaining an organization's costs. So traditional data centers have very high capital costs. Why? You purchase servers, routers, switches, firewalls, load balancers, racks, power distribution units, generators, UPSs, transformers, air conditioning and cooling equipment like you can't even imagine, and lots of real estate. I've worked in organizations that have had 100,000 square feet of database space, and 200, and 300, and 400. I've worked in organizations that have a data center that spans a half a mile long and 50 and 100 feet wide based on these organizations. So this real estate, this electric, this power and cooling gets extremely expensive. But you still have operational expenses on the data center, but they're much less. And what are they? They're your staff to maintain these things, which are expensive. They're your electric bills, which can get really expensive when you're dealing with megawatts and megawatts and megawatts of power. The WAN connections, and this is the place where the cloud gets really cheap. Let's say you've got 10,000 remote locations. You typically speaking have 10,000 wide area connections or 10,000 direct connections equivalents to you, which gets real expensive. Then you've got to but most of your costs are for equipment and the data center buying, and the operational expenses are less. Now in cloud computing, it all changes. You're not buying anything, but you pay for everything. I mean everything. Though that's where you're going to have to determine what makes most sense. Sometimes it's cheaper in the data center based upon your workflows, and sometimes it's a lot cheaper in the cloud based upon your networking. You need to know the environment to make the best solution. That's why a cloud architect is different than a solution architect. The cloud architect is going to be able to find the best solution for the customer. That's why they're paid a lot more than solution architects, and that's why they have a bigger career potential, because they can always work as a solution architect. But they have to be able to understand how to design the best things for a business based upon the business's needs and goals and desires and regulatory environment. So, since we know everything in the cloud you're going to pay for, how do we constrain costs in the cloud? Well, we have to get really smart about what we do. Step one of cost control. Only provision what you need. So, don't buy more than you need. That's pretty obvious. That's like, okay, Mike, you sound like a rocket scientist. Well, first one, only buy what you need. So in order to do that intentionally, you have to monitor your systems. So what do I mean by buy what you need? Let's say you use what I typically use in an environment. I use for almost everything. I'm using these new AMD EPYC servers that have like 120 cores and a couple terabytes of RAM because they're cheap and their performance is the best in the world right now. So I would use that in the data center. Do I need 128 cores and maybe 4 terabytes of RAM for a web server? Generally speaking, no. Now, in the cloud, because you have auto-scaling, you don't need to overbuild. You can add as needed in terms of capacity. So monitor your systems. If you have a 120 core system and it's running at 2% and you're moving to the cloud, maybe you only need 2 cores or 5 or 4 cores. So provision exactly what you need based upon the utilization of your systems. So Why are you monitoring your systems? Because then you know how to properly provision them. So size them based upon what you need. This is where you've got the tactical advantage, the strategic advantage in the cloud. See, normally, let's say you're building a web server for the biggest day of the year. Let's say you're building a web server for a retail store. The day after Thanksgiving is typically the busiest day in the US for retail stores. It's not uncommon for retail stores to have web servers that are literally floating around at 3% utilization all year long to go up to 90% utilization during the day after Thanksgiving in the US. And they have to build for that because that's the one day where an organization becomes profitable. So as an architect, you need to understand that. So in a data center, you build for max use. In the cloud, you build for average use, and you can use auto scaling. So properly size your resources based upon average load on the cloud. So when you're doing lift and shift architectures, which is one of the most common, which is basically take what you have and you migrate to the cloud, here's your chance to optimize the size of your computing performance. Now, granted, if you've got a 120 core server that's operating at 80% utilization, you're not going to shrink that on the cloud. But, for example, if you've got 120 core server that's only at 1%, well, then you can shrink that and move to the cloud. So you can still do lift and shift, which is what all organizations like from a control and flexibility perspective, while simultaneously reducing your costs. The next part of step 2 is actually to decouple your application architectures. Remember when we talked about databases and we talked about adding things like an SQSQ so you could smooth the CPU performance on the database and reduce the read and write load? Well, it's the same thing here. Decouple your systems. So provision only what you need, properly size your things and monitor them to make sure you're using what you need based upon your current workloads, and decouple your systems to use smaller, more modular things. Now let's talk about the next thing to do. Purchase the right platform. So when you're getting your compute systems, do you want on-demand? Do you need spot instances? Do you do reserved instances? Guess what? For most organizations, best results will be achieved with on-demand, reserved, and spot instances. So when do you use which? If you know that you are going to be using a certain thing for a certain period of time, use reserved instances because they are going to give you a very big discount over purchase of on-demand pricing. If you don't know what your needs are, use on-demand until you can figure it out. Or use reserved instances for your baseline needs and then add on-demand instances for growth. That's probably the best way to build your mission-critical systems. Now, what about spot instances? Spot instances, as we discussed earlier, are a way for you to purchase unused capacity on the AWS cloud, which is terrific. But they can be preempted or shut down if the bid price goes above you. So if you've got some short workflows that are not mission critical, you can use spot instances to do them as additional computing power at real cheap. So for the most part, the best way you can schedule things and optimize costs in the cloud is to know when to use on-demand, spot, and reserved instances and mix them and use them appropriately. The next part of the process is optional. So managed servers, services, and serverless can get a little cheaper on the cloud in terms of operational ongoing expenses. But to use managed services in the cloud, you typically speaking have to transform what you have or recode them. Now that recoding can be a fairly expensive process to do. And once you refactor your applications, if you have a problem with your cloud provider or you don't like the way things are going, you are stuck. You're going to have to spend a lot of money to do that. So managed services can basically give you a cheaper cost ongoing, but they can also cost you in terms of flexibility. Architecturally speaking, you're going to have to make those choices and determine what you do. We find that there's the combination of the ability to come in and come off of the cloud easily with some lift and shift concepts, while leveraging some of the better features of serverless often gives you the most flexibility, customization of your design, and puts you in a fantastic position to win with a great architecture at a great price. So the next thing that you can do to help your organization stick to its cost is the concept of budgets. AWS has a thing called budgets. So what you do is you set up a budget, which is basically an alerting system. And you create your budget in the management console or the billings console. Say, let me know when I've reached 50% of my budget. And when you do, you know what happens? You get an alert. So it's a way to keep track of it. The next service that AWS talks about that you could be tested on, so we'll talk about it, is the following. It's Trusted Advisor. And Trusted Advisor is an online tool to help you basically optimize your spending. And basically what it works is Trusted Advisor is going to scan your infrastructure, and it's going to pair what you're doing with best practices. Again, remember, this is an automated system, and whenever things are automated, you may get good or not good information because they're automated. Just keep that in mind. But it can give you good information to at least look at or consider in your architecture that could potentially give you good advice to improve the performance, security, availability of your systems and reduce costs. Remember, it's automated, so you're going to have to use your knowledge as an architect to determine if it's good information or bad information. And then, so basically, there's two different versions you can use. You can use a basic. If you have basic or developer support plans, you can get 6 security checks and 50 service limits checks. And if you have on a business support or an enterprise plan, you get 115 Trusted Advisor checks, 14 cost optimization, 17 security, 24 fault tolerance, 10 performance, and 50 service limits. So you get a lot more that way. These, realistically speaking, are the ways that you would reduce your costs in the cloud. So at this point, I'll open it up and answer some questions, and then we'll talk about building high availability architectures, which means we're getting close to finishing it. Lutetia text, when does a new batch start, and may I know how many possible students in a batch? Lutetia, I don't have batches. I bring all of my students together at the same time. I have all my students work in pairs. I have experienced people work with junior people, and I do that for lots of reasons. In medicine, we mix experienced people. In junior medicine and martial arts and medicine are both where I come from. We do the same thing in martial arts. I make sure that I always have one student working with another student. As an architect, one of your key job things to do is to be able to explain things to the CEO, who may or may not be a tech person, why your solution is going to work. And I like to have my people work with other junior students so they get used to learning how to teach people that have less experience how things work, because it's a critical part of the cloud architect job. My students all help each other. They all graduate at different times intentionally, and they all help each other get jobs. So I've created a big giant family of students, and I intentionally have people working together. So the next time people could start is literally 5 minutes from now. And they could immediately start receiving the training that's there and claimed in the videos. And on Monday, they'd be part of the first live mentorship call, and the next one would be on Friday. So we mix everybody together with intention. We want everybody from lots of different skills to go through. I've had people for 2 weeks that are hired by AWS, for example, if they got lucky, but I've also had other people that are with me for 12 weeks, and some people that take me 6 to 9 months, but we've been doing this for 20 years, and mixing people and making sure that you have access to lots of different people with lots of different backgrounds in a good team environment can make you better, because you may be working with a coder, you may be working with an engineer, you may be working with a database person, you may be working with a networking person. Everybody enhances each other's experience. So the starting batch is now. The next people on Monday will be part of the next class. It's a shame you missed out on yesterday, where we had an AWS hiring manager talk about what he wants and why he wants our people, and why he likes people that are trained in soft skills, emotional intelligence, empathy, enthusiasm, as well as architecture. Because you got to have the technical skills, but you can't be a cloud architect without those other skills. Cloud engineer, sure, but not a cloud architect. Now, I hope I answered your questions, and let's talk about building high availability systems. If you've got more questions, please don't hesitate to answer them, and we'll get to them. So, let's talk about high availability systems and what that actually means. Availability refers to a service being usable when you want it. So if I were to go to a website and it didn't exist, it would not be available. So availability refers to it being available when you need it. And in order to understand exactly what you need, you have to understand the availability requirements of your system. Availability can be built to very different standards, and the way you build it can have a profound impact on the systems, how available they are, but also their costs. When we start thinking availability, we typically talk about 3 things. We talk about 99% of the time. 99 is 2 nines available, 99.9 is 3 nines available, 99.99 is 4 nines available, and 99.999% of the time is 5 nines available. And every organization requires different. There is a lot that goes into availability performance, and we're going to talk about what that is, and we'll talk about the principles. Most organizations would consider 99.99 or 4 nines to be relatively good availability. Now, that may work for most organizations, but it will not work for all. Service providers like the phone company or internet service provider, a bank, a healthcare organization, or a global retailer cannot tolerate 99.99% availability, which means you're going to have to do a lot of things to the cloud because to even come close to high availability. Because even if you did everything in multi-availability zones, in 2 availability zones, you still can't get above 4 nines available. It's not possible. So, if you need to design for extreme high availability for a bank, a healthcare organization, a service provider, or a global business, you're going to have to do other things, and we're going to talk about it. A lot of these things are technical, and a lot of these things are non-technical. There's a small number of us that have built true, highly available 5 nines networks. I've been doing it for 20-some years. They are not cheap to build. They can be billions of dollars to build, but many organizations need high availability systems that are 5 nines available. Let's talk about why, and why they're so hard to build. At 99.9% available, which is probably greater than your home internet, you've got 8.76 hours of downtime per year. At 4 nines available, which is the best you could actually do with 2 availability zones, in AWS you get 52.6 minutes of downtime per year. Think about that. That's almost an hour at 4 nines available. Now let's say you've got a bank that can literally lose $20 million a minute. That is an incredible amount of money to not be available. So this is why it's so essential to understand the business. This is why cloud architects need to understand the business. Would you spend $1 billion to protect $100,000? No. But you might spend 10 million to save 100 million. In fact, you definitely would, or almost always would. So you have to understand the business. The architect is a hybrid business executive and engineer. You've got to understand the strategy and determine something that's going to work for them. And then you're going to have to do ROI modeling to show that it makes sense financially. Now, going from 4 nines available, which I don't consider high availability because I've been working with 5 nines for the last 20 years, to 5 nines, which is 99.999% of the time, that means 5 minutes and 25 seconds of downtime. This is where you've got to be good. This is where your senior and distinguished architects, people like me that have done this for 20-some years, know how to do it. 5 minutes and 25 seconds of downtime per year. How many times do you have to upgrade a system for reboot? That's already coming out of your 5 minutes and 25 minutes and 15 seconds a year. 5.25 minutes is 5 nines. So what goes into this? How do you build these highly available systems? Well, first and foremost, you build it on the following. No single points of failure. That means redundant power. It means redundant cooling in the data center that's connecting to the cloud. It means redundant network connections. That means direct connection and maybe a VPN backup. Or a direct connection plus a direct connection plus a VPN backup. That's what I mean by redundant network connections. Now you need redundant routers. The router that connects to AWS. If it's just on one router and the router fails, you're done. So, realistically speaking, here's how organizations do high availability connections. First, they use high availability routers. What does that mean? Redundant power supplies, redundant control modules, thinking router, switch brain, router brain, and redundant line cards. And that way, if any single component of the switch fails, you're still up and running. But, that's not enough. You need multiple connections across multiple routers because even a high availability router could potentially still fail. So 1 is none, 2 is 1, and 3 is better than 2. Whenever it comes to high availability, you need a lot of redundancy, no single points of failure. Redundant switches, redundant connections between all your routers and switches, redundant servers, redundant load balancers, DNS, storage, redundancy everywhere, and redundant applications, even redundancy in your databases and everywhere in between. That's part of it. Now, it's a lot easier on the cloud for the most part because AWS maintains redundant power. They maintain the redundant cooling. They've got redundant connections, network connections across their backbone, and they're going to reroute around things in a manner that you won't even see. These service providers, typically speaking, run an IGP, and they typically have a bunch of RSVP signaling and MPLS tunnels and explicit and backup paths that they can reroute around a cable cut instantly or near instantly. Great things can be done with software-defined networking as well, which is way about outside of the scope, and that's more for network architects like me. But realize, you can do a lot on the network to improve availability. And networking is a critical part of building high availability systems because they do the rerouting around problems. So it's a lot easier because you don't have to worry about the networking connections. And they've got multiple connections to the internet, pretty much across every internet service provider through BGP peering, and they've got redundancy everywhere. So it's a lot easier on the cloud. So how do you do it? For normal users, meaning 4 nines available if that's enough, basically you use multiple availability zones. Now that's not enough. You're going to need something called change management, which we'll talk about later, but multi-AZ or multiple availability zones really helps. Now, if you're going to do it all on the cloud and you need 5 nines, multiple availability zones is not sufficient. You're going to need multi-region and multi-availability zones. So think of it this way. 2 regions and multiple availability zones per region. That is how you achieve 5 nines on the cloud, at least by doing that. But that is not enough. Anything that you need needs to be in multiple regions. So your compute instance needs to be multiple availability zones or regions, your databases, your load balancers, your DNS, it's all got to work. But what else do you need? You need change management. We're going to talk about that a lot soon. Let's talk about the network now. I told you before, redundant network connections. And if you're going to do it, you could have a direct connection and a VPN backup. Think about it this way. They've got to be across different service providers. Let's say I have a direct connection on the AT&T network. Do I really want my backup direct connection on the AT&T network? Of course not, because if the AT&T network goes down, they both go down. So maybe if I have 2 direct connections, I have an AT&T direct connection and a Verizon direct connection. Whatever it is, I need redundancy everywhere. Now, let's also say I'm using internet for VPN. Make sure that's also in a different internet service provider, because generally speaking, if a provider is going to have a problem, they're going to have a problem in lots of different places. So, talk about that. So let's look at it this way. For most clients, it's going to be a direct connection and a VPN backup, but for high performance clients, it's going to be maybe 4 direct connections in a link aggregation group and maybe 4 direct connections in another link aggregation group, giving them link redundancy and router redundancy and switch redundancy and connection redundancy in a lot of different ways. So the performance need of the organization is going to determine exactly the type of backup and the cost of downtime. If there's no cost of downtime, who cares? Don't worry about it. So what is your downtime cost? And that will determine exactly what you need to work around. Or could an outage cause a competitive difference? Would an outage cause brand damage? So it's really about understanding the business when you start designing these systems architectures. Now, you can't have high availability systems if your systems are not locked down or secure either. So let's talk about what you can do to improve the security, hence the availability of your systems. Now, if you do your security wrong, you'll cause outages. So security improves availability when you know what you're doing. So don't make mistakes in security. And if you're not a cloud security architect and you need security, go find some security people to help work with you. Do it right. Make sure you build it right. I saw a joke the other day, and it said, I saved 5 minutes of reading documentation by doing 5 hours of troubleshooting. And it's very true. When you know what to do, everything's simple. But if you don't know what to do or you don't read the documentation, well, let's face it, that's when everything falls apart. So that's why training is super important. How you get it, where you got it, train with us, train on your own. Make sure you learn how everything works. You cannot be an architect if you don't know how the systems that build the cloud and make the cloud work. So make sure data center and network training is part of your cloud computing or cloud architect career development program. It's essential. So how do we do security? Let's refresh. We use the principle of least privilege with IAM. We disable unnecessary services on our servers. We regularly patch our systems with security updates. We limit the blast radius of problems with AWS organizations. We keep unwanted traffic out of our subnets with network ACLs. We keep unwanted traffic out of our hosts with security groups. We lock down our systems with host-based firewalls and malware protection. We use a firewall such as WAF, some kind of IDS IPS system to deal with intrusions. We deal with Shield for DDoS protection, and we deal with all kinds of security along the way. We make sure we have physical security protecting the routers and switches that connect to the cloud. We use strong passwords when we use passwords, and we template known good configurations so we can use CloudFormation templates or at least AMIs to make sure that other things meet the same needs. What else do you do? Well, you need to back up a lot. Back up an absolutely a lot. So a consistent backup strategy will protect you against lost data. Why are all these systems in existence? We're to basically collect information and then do something with this information. So back up, and back up. When you back up, store it in at least one additional location, not your own. So what good is a backup if you back it up into your building and then the building burns down? So take a backup and back it up to a remote location in addition to your local site. Make production images of your servers, and that way you can get them up and running as fast and quickly as possible. These are the kind of things that you should do. How else can you improve the availability of your systems? Well, use auto-scaling. If you get DDoSed or someone sends more requests that your systems they can handle, they're not going to be available. But auto-scaling can help. Other times systems become unavailable is because they're too busy, so auto-scaling can improve your things. Decouple your application architecture by having a immediate stop. Let's say you've got a web, an app, a database tier, and you stick an SQS between the app and the database tier. If the database goes down, you're not losing the messages, so decouple when possible. Cache when possible, because it improves the performance and the availability of the system and further reduces the load on systems. Make sure you're using a good secure environment with your DNS. They include things like DNSSEC and things if you want to prevent man-in-the-middle attacks. And use load balancers, because load balancers improve performance and availability by removing single points of failure by enabling the share load across multiple servers. So, building a high availability system, monitor your systems. Use logging and audit functions, monitor for systems alerts, look for security breaches, look for usage, and monitor for performance. This last piece is the secret. This is how I know when I interview someone if they know anything about high availability or not. If I ask people about high availability and they tell me the tech, I know they've never worked on high availability and I know they've just read books. If they tell me that change management is part of the high availability systems, I know they've been around. What is change management? Imagine an environment. Let's take the ocean. Let's say we've taken the ocean and we've put it all into a giant swimming pool. If I jump in the swimming pool, it's going to create a ripple that's going to affect everybody else. Now let's say I drop the car in the swimming pool from out of the sky. It's going to affect everybody else. So when you're dealing with technology, you're dealing with like jumping something in a pool and creating a splash. So anything you do in one location can affect other parts of the system. The network's a live system. It's not dead. It's got lots of moving parts. And because of that, a change that you make one place can change something else. So prior to making any changes in an environment, you have to ask all the stakeholders, are you ready? Can I make this change? What kind of a change will it impact on the business? And if it will impact the business, it's not a good trade. So what you have to do is find a time to make your changes, except in an emergency. So change management is the process of asking all stakeholders. So let's say I wanted to change an ACL rule on a network ACL. I would launch an email to everybody that's part of the change management process, and I would say, at 2:30 a.m. on June 22nd, 2021, I would like to make this modification. Will this affect any of you? And the application people will say no, and then the network people will say no, and then somebody else will say no, and hopefully everybody says no, and I make the change. If something happens right after the change, these people that are part of the stakeholder team may actually be doing testing right after the change to make sure before it goes into production that my change didn't break anything. That's why you need change management. And what happens if my change broke something? I'd revert to the original thing and or fix it based upon how critical it is. Every stakeholder needs to know ahead of time, and that's how you're going to know exactly how to design things. So that's why high availability systems, we're talking about building them, and that's why change management is part of it. Do not make a change as affecting you. So what do you need to do? No single points of failure. Redundant everything. Change management, multi-AZ for 99.99, multi-region plus multi-AZ for 5 nines, along with change management. Now we've talked a little bit about some high availability concepts. At this point, I'm going to open it up to some more questions. Who has questions on high availability system design? Okay, Data Dave, I saw you asked a really great question. There are so many services on AWS. When does a cloud architect need to learn a new one, or should they focus on learning very few? So, Data Dave, best way I can describe it is the most important thing for a cloud architect to learn is how the cloud works. Not necessarily the name of the service, how the cloud works. Which means understanding of what you're moving, the applications, the network, the data center. See, here's the thing. It's very easy for me to learn the name of a service. For example, let's say I wanted to use a NoSQL database in my environment. Well, I got lots of options. I could pick Apache Cassandra, I could pick AWS DynamoDB, I could pick Google Cloud Table. It doesn't matter. All I need to know as an architect is I need a NoSQL database and why. I need to know that I'm using, say, a NoSQL database because I need flexibility in the schema, or I need extreme scalability, or I need to know that I need a relational database to establish the relationship between variables, or I might need to know that I need a data warehouse for X, Y, and Z reason. These are the things that I need to know as an architect. I need to be able to look at the business and say, what is your goal? And then design technology to help an organization become more competitive. The name of these services, very important for certification, but not necessarily so important for the cloud architect. The cloud architect needs to know what they're designing, and then they can easily go to a cheat sheet or a chart. Okay, here's the name of the GCP service or the Azure service. That's easy. The hard part is knowing what to design, how to design it. So no need to focus exclusively as deep on these services. Still need to know what some of them are, so you know which ones are your options, but you don't necessarily need to remember all the idiosyncrasies of them because you just know what you need. If I need a compute instance, if I need a server that has 64 cores and a terabyte of RAM, that's what I need architecturally speaking. Now, if I go to Google's compute engine or an AWS EC2, I can select one from the chart that does that. That's not critical and that's easy to do. But it's definitely important necessarily to understand how the systems work. Dave, if I answered your question, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to ask Daniel's question. Daniel's question, and it's a great question. How fast is an architect expected to plan and present an architecture plan? Wow. That is an answer with an it depends. And what I mean by this, Daniel, is I have worked with clients where it's taken a team of 50 people 6 months to actually design an architecture for them. And it's cost tens of millions of dollars to have the right people. I had started the leadership. I bring a team of engineers and architects, and they ask questions of everybody along the way. It could take us a very, very long time to actually ascertain all the technologies that exist, learn all about the business to make a recommendation. Daniel, I've also been in environments where I've met with a client and I've been able to design the architecture on the fly on a whiteboard with them on the first meeting. It depends. So if you're dealing with a site that's got 30, 40,000 remote locations, this is going to be an 20 to 50,000 subnets and hundreds of thousands of employees. It could take you a team of 56 months to even think about what the architecture could be. And the architecture is going to be designed, and it could be lots and lots of writing up and diagramming, and then you're going to build, and when that's done, you're going to have a cloud engineering team to build out that's bigger than anything you could possibly imagine, because I've done these things too. Or it could just be something you can do on the fly. So I hope I answered your question there. Daniel, if you've got a further question, I'd love to answer it. And you've always got a master DB and a backup DB, so one is going to be running so I hope I answered your question. Any other questions here any other questions? Who analyzes the cost of the design? That's a good question. As a cloud architect, you will be doing a lot of cost of the design, but you're going to, more realistically speaking, have a team of people help you actually design the cost. I know there's automated services, but they don't count. You're going to be manually doing this. You're going to be checking anything. So who's going to analyze the cost of the design? Here's what you're going to do as an architect. You're going to consider all your cost design options. And then after you consider the cost of all the design options, do you know what you're going to do next? Then you're going to design it. And then you're going to have to do an ROI model. And that's why business acumen is another one of the skills necessary for a cloud architect. Here's what I mean by business acumen. See, you have two choices in anything you do in life. You could say, today's Saturday, there's free certified solution architect professional training, and I need that to advance my career. I'm going to attend. Or you could say, it's sunny outside, I live 5 minutes from the beach, and I want to go to the beach. The opportunity cost of training here is that you're not at the beach, for example, or vice versa, whatever is local. Well, with businesses, it's the same thing. If they spend money on a cloud architecture, they can't spend it somewhere else. So what a business will do with every decision is they're going to look at the expected value, meaning what they think they're going to gain from the decision versus its cost. And they're going to compare that to the expected value of another opportunity, and they're going to place their financial resources in the place that gives them the best return on investment. Maybe the cloud, could be some other new software or feature, and that's how every decision is going to be made for at the business. So that's why K1, when you're dealing with a client, you must be able to speak their language. You must be able to do ROI modeling. You must be able to talk finances, numbers, business. That's half of the cloud architect's job, and that's why the soft skills, communication skills, emotional intelligence, and all these things are so important, because you're going to be presenting the cost of the solution, and you're going to have to show the business how the cost of your solution is actually going to help them financially. Because organizations don't buy tech because they like it. They hate tech. They buy tech for a competitive advantage, to increase sales, decrease costs, improve operational efficiency. That's the reason. So K1, I hope I answered your question. Any more questions for me? Okay, well, let's just talk about how to pass this exam. And relatively, when you're dealing with this, oh, Daniel has some questions, hold on. Okay, next question is from Daniel. Is it feasible to equate an on-prem architecture to get a cloud architecture position? Absolutely. So about 90% of all cloud architecture things right now are actually lift and shift, which are basically moving the same virtual machines from the data center to the cloud. All that you do as a cloud architect, for the most part, is taking your data center things and putting them in the cloud. So Daniel, if you answer that question, absolutely. The most successful, easiest to place people I've actually found are people that have either worked in a data center or the network. I know so many senior, distinguished, and principal architect positions that have been filled by people that have no certifications other than a Cisco certified internet expert like me, or a data center background, and then when they join the cloud providers, then they end up getting certified. So that's just speaking that. I hope I answered your question. Shikar architectures are designed overall systematically, and then individual modules can be done one by one. So it doesn't have to be an all or nothing, but the architecture is the overall design, and the design might include a plan for long-term migrations as well. Now, YHAM, you have a question on the career development program. What is the length of the program? Well, I'll make it very simple for you. The length of the program is approximately 16 weeks or 250 hours. If you click the link of the program, it will give you a complete and total syllabus of every module and every lesson that's in that program. So here's the link to the program. Here's a coupon code for 20% off, which we're not going to be offering for much longer because our program has just grown so fast. But temporarily we're still offering this for a very short period of time. I'll make it very clear. As I mentioned, we have 2 3-hour live sessions per week, which is 6 hours per week, and a 16-hour week program that is 96. So basically 100 hours of live training, 50 hours of AWS training, and an additional 50 hours of lab training, and an additional 50 hours or so of soft skills, emotional intelligence, business acumen training. So 250 hours, you can literally click that link, and if you click that link, what it's going to do is it's going to take you to a page, and you can literally click a drop down on every one of those things and see every lesson that's in our program. I hope I answered your question there, YHAM. If you've got more questions, I'm happy to answer them, but I wanted to make sure you had actually something that was substantial enough for you to look at. You can see all of the 170 some lessons that are in that program, let alone, but you can't see the Monday and Friday calls that we have each week because they're live, which we record and we place in the program under the under the section call recordings. Does anybody else have any more questions? Okay, if there's no more questions, we're going to talk just briefly about how to pass the exam. So when you're dealing with AWS exams, no matter which one, they can be kind of complicated. And the reason they're relatively complicated is these questions can literally cover anything about anything. And when you're dealing with the Certified Solutions Architect Professional, the hardest part of the exam is actually reading the questions. I'm going to say this again. The hardest part of this exam is literally reading the questions. It's not like the Google Professional Cloud Architect exam, which asks you a very complicated, straightforward question with expects a complicated answer. The AWS exams are the worst when it comes to actually reading the questions. And Tejo, if you're the Tejo Kumar that's in my program, all you have to do is follow the videos in the program and you'll see all the soft skills training programs. Lots of the questions could be answered, lots of these things, just look in the program and you'll see that they're there. The first 5 or 6 sections, because they're the hardest things to learn. So when it comes to passing the exam, remember they can cover literally anything. And these questions are wordy, and they're hard to read, and they're hard to understand. Biggest challenge in this exam is reading these darn questions. Now, if you've been in tech for a while, this is going to be a miserable exam for you. If you've not been in tech for a while and you're new to tech, this isn't going to be a challenging exam. Here's the reason. If you've been experienced in tech like me forever, this will be an ugly exam. Because you're going to get a question which is going to take you 4 minutes to read, because you're going to read it 3 or 4 times, and then you're going to have 4 or 5 multiple choice answers. Now, answer 1 may be the AWS way, answer 2 may be the Google way, answer 3 may be the Azure way, and answer 4 may actually be the Cisco way. So when you actually get a question, you might be given 4 perfect or 5 perfectly correct answers, but only 1 is the AWS way. So if you're new to tech and you've only learned AWS, simple. If you're like me and you've worked on everything, wow, this stuff gets ugly, and it gets ugly fast because you have to filter in your mind, not the Google way, not the Azure way, not the Cisco way, not the industry standard way, the AWS way. But guess what? It's an AWS exam, so they can do that. So when you're taking these exams, select the best answer. It may not be perfectly correct. Choose the best one, because realize it's the best of the possible answer choices. Focus on the way AWS does things. Do not focus necessarily on the way the industry does things. If you are unsure and there's no other answers, use industry. But otherwise, think AWS, AWS, AWS. They make the test. If you make the test, you can make the test have whatever it necessarily needs. So, recommendations. Read a book on this as well. In addition to the training course, go through the training course at least 1 more time. Read the AWS white papers covering the services listed in the book. In our experience, they come up with some ridiculous exam questions and they're focused on what's inside of these white papers. Now get a practice test. As a rule, I think practice tests are the absolute worst way to study and learn. But when you're dealing with questions that are written in an incredibly complicated manner, intentionally difficult to read, you've got to get used to these things, so get a practice exam. Now, the way you should go through the practice exam is not memorizing questions and answers. That's cheating. That's not going to help you get anywhere, and it's not going to help your career. What you should do is get one of these good question banks that asks you questions. When you approach the question, do the following. When the question asks you something and you don't know it, first look up the question. Then look up all the answers and then find why the answers are right or wrong. And in the process of doing this, by going through the questions and literally looking up every question, what's right and wrong, and every answer, what's right and wrong, the practice test can be a learning experience for you, not just a means to cheat by helping you memorize questions and answers and pass the exam. So you get a test bank of about 600, 700 questions. If you search it my way, where basically you look up every question and you look up all the answers, around the time you get to question 75 to 100, chances are you're already doing well because you've actually learned the content. Do this until you know every question in the exam. When you can take this practice exam and score a 95% or greater, schedule your exam, you're ready. That's what we recommend. Practice exam as the last final step. Schedule the exam when you can consistently score above 95. These exams are expensive and you don't want to have to pay to take them twice. And it's hard on your ego if you don't pass something. So if it's hard on your ego when you don't pass something, don't pass something. So make sure you can score at least a 95 on a practice exam. Because the hardest part of this exam, I'm telling you, is reading these questions. Do not read these questions when you're tired. Last night, one of my data scientists was helping me with something, and he's one of the smartest people I've ever met in my life. I had been on 6 hours of webinars and on about 37 phone calls prior to being able to have work with my data scientist, and he's a great, super smart guy. He's presenting something to me, and I had to have him go over it 3 times because I was too tired. So don't take the test in this thing. Don't stay up all night and cram the day before. Get a good night's sleep the night before. Eat healthy. Avoid alcohol or anything that could affect your thinking or judgment. If it's an in-person exam, arrive early. You never know what's going to happen when you get there stuck in traffic parking. You don't want to be stressed. Why am I concerned about you being relaxed? I'm going to tell you the neurophysiology of why. When we are calm, we use the prefrontal cortex, or the thinking and the logical reasoning part of our brains. When we get stressed, the prefrontal cortex actually shuts down and the amygdala kicks in. When the amygdala kicks in, we can't think clearly. So you need to be calm, so be rested, feel good. So this is not the kind of thing to be rushing around and parking last minute. Make sure you're early. Now, if you're going to take it online, again, be early, about 30 minutes. Why? Some of this exam software is garbage. I used one of the exam providers and my Mac Pro locked up. And I had to power cycle it multiple times just to work with the software. I switched computers, had to make a virtual machine to take an exam on. All these kind of things happen and you don't know. Give yourself the time to do so. So give yourself plenty of time and preparation. The reason I talked about the amygdala is the hardest part of these things is reading these questions. And if you're tired or exhausted or frustrated or unhappy, you're not going to be able to do it because the prefrontal cortex will shut up. So make it a fantastic environment. Make it a wonderful assignment. Arrive prepared. Prepare, prepare, prepare. Be rested, and you're going to do well. We've pretty much covered most everything that would be covered in the Certified Solution Architect Professional, except for DevOps, and we don't cover DevOps because it's not architecture, and we also don't cover DevOps because we're not DevOps professionals. When we create training at Go Cloud Architects, we are not like the certification providers. I see people making advanced networking courses that have never worked in networking in their life. We don't create training in areas where we don't have 25 to 50 years of experience. We are creating a cloud DevOps program. I'm working with a DevOps engineer that's basically had 25 years experience in DevOps. We're doing the same thing with other programs. We don't create anything where we don't take industry experts that have at least 10 to 20 years experience alongside of our 25 years experience when we build training programs. So we didn't cover DevOps in this because I am not a DevOps professional, and neither are any of the course providers that are teaching these courses, but I don't want to give you information that's not accurate and that's not going to help build your cloud computing careers. We want to teach you the right way, so we focus on what we know. Do you have questions for us on any content in the Certified Solution Architect Professional exam? Do you have any architecture questions? Do you have any career questions? I have 30 minutes left, and I am happy to do anything I can to help you guys in your careers. I've been texted from my team telling me I should list a link to the course program, which I'm going to do. I have also will list a coupon code for 20% off. My team yelled at me for doing this, but they told me I have until this end of this weekend to list my phone number, so I'm going to do it. So I'm going to provide a number if you've got any questions about our training or anything like that, or how to get to your goals. Are there any other questions for me? Any more questions for me on any component or anything we've discussed? Cloud computer careers, how to get your first cloud architect job? I've got 30 minutes, so if you've got any questions, I'm happy to answer them for you. Again, what a little longer because there's like this long 30-second delay between the time I speak and the time you guys can hear what I say. Okay, well, If any of you are looking for information on how to get your first cloud architect job, we have a webinar every Monday and Thursday, and I'll leave a link to that. We will tell you everything that you need to do. Ramya. Ramya, for people with experience, I'm still suggesting the Cloud Architect Career Development Program. And the reason I'm suggesting this, Ramya, and not the experience program, is the additional things that are there. In my experience, after working with people and coaching people for 2 decades, and also after speaking with hiring managers throughout the world, and I've spoken to thousands throughout my career, the biggest challenge that we take to getting somebody promoted, for example, is actually soft skills, emotional intelligence, presentation skills, and the such. So it's not just enough to learn about how the cloud works. You actually have to understand not only enough to how to speak to the CEO, the CFO, the CIO, the CTO, present. So for that reason, we're dealing with the Cloud Architect Career Development Program. The only thing that we use that Cloud Architect Experience Program is as follows. There are people that have asked us to basically, well, I've told people for years, if you want to be a cloud architect, you basically speaking have to know the network and the data center. So to buy a 16-core Xeon server with 128 gigs of RAM and some SSD drives, NVMe drives, and a RAID array to give you the performance capacity. And people had called me and said, I can't afford to buy a server like that, it's too expensive. So the experience program is a means for you to just do some practice labs in my environment. Whereas the Cloud Architect Career Development Program is about building you a long-term, highly lucrative cloud computing career. So that's the one I always recommend, unless someone just wants servers. And that's what the other program is for. So, and the Derek Houston, using your program will prepare to take, yeah. So which program? Like Cloud Architect Career Development Program, Derek, or this program? Because my programs will prepare you to take both the associate and professional exams along the way. Mr. Mack, thank you so much. Really, oh, Marithi, so nice to hear from you. Mike, are you still talking in the architecture class? I'm not sure that I necessarily know what you want. K1, so wonderful to have you here. Robert Cave, we have 2 kinds of resume reviews. We have people that just go to our training.gocloudarchitects.com page that can purchase a resume review along with a consulting session with me, and I'll provide the link. Where everybody that's in our Cloud Architect Career Development Program gets resume reviews and resume guidance, as well as help with their career planning. So this is how you would look if you went in just a resume session. But if you were looking for resume guidance, interview preparation, interview guidance, and everything that's necessary to get your Cloud Architect job, that's the Cloud Architect Career Development Program. Everything is included inside of that. And that's the link that I provided along with the coupon code to get you there. And ABDL, I still don't necessarily understand your question. Maybe from Dave from my team if you can get it. Are you still talking the architecture class? And then it says, I think you mentioned might do one if you don't get enough response. I'm sorry, I don't necessarily understand your question. If you can rephrase it, I'll happily answer it. Or if Dave can understand it. Derek, you can definitely, if you've got enough of a background or you learn fast, you can definitely bypass the associate and go straight to the professional. I do that with my students all the time, but I make sure that they're really solid and knowledgeable first because it's an expensive exam. There's no reason to take the associate exam if you know enough to pass the professional. Whatever's easiest for you. I generally start speaking, I generally start with a professional exam, but I would never, ever, ever advise anybody to do the cloud practitioner exam because unless you want to sell products, as a sales rep, it offers you no career options, and it's about the same level of difficulty as the associate. No reason you can't just do the professional as a start if you desire. Okay, let's see if there's any more questions in here. So I think there is a... So Daniel, people can use portfolios, but the portfolios need to be something that are good. For example, if you have a portfolio and you built OpenStack Ansible Cloud, set up Microsoft Active Directory to learn IAM, that's going to be respected. If you've set up server virtualization with VMware ESXi, that's a thing to put in your portfolio, definitely. With our students, what we do is we have a research and development section in their resume, and we place all these things, and that's a portfolio of skills. We have to do that because we have to improve your resume. We've got to give your resume a place to have all these things. And we put it in a research and development section. That's how you really build a really great resume. In the research and development section, it'll bypass keyword scanners that way. It gives the hiring manager a chance to see that you go way above and beyond, and things like that. As Dave mentioned, Ramya, I have many people that have been in the tech industry for 25 years in my program. I have dual CCIEs, single CCIEs, and people in very senior positions that are part of this program. And we work very diligently to boost their careers. We can provide extreme career acceleration for experienced people by focusing on those things that matter most, that are not part of the technical program, that are part of the business training. I spent about $250,000 on education to learn how to be a better business leader because it affected my architecture career. And I have a couple of master's degrees plus lots of specialized training, and that training is included in this program because that's how we help you advance your career. Are there any other tech questions or questions for me? So Tammy, like a reserve, I'm not completely sure. So Tamoy, you asked a question about from a cost point of view, like a reserved instance for a year or multiple serverless runs. I don't know what you mean by that question. If you're asking me which is cheaper, serverless or reserved instances, let me know if that's the question. And the answer to that, if that's the question, will be it depends. It depends how much use it is. Because with serverless, you're paying for as you're used, but with your EC2 instances, you're just paying for the instance. Serverless has a lot of advantages, like it's easier to manage and it may be cheaper. Serverless means huge expenses refactoring your applications. It could literally cost an organization $50 or $100 million to refactor an application and migrate to serverless based upon the application. And if they want to leave the cloud, it could again cost $50 to $100 million to get off of the serverless. So most people are doing lift and shift, but strategically speaking, there are times to use it. So it all depends. So you have to evaluate things every single time. That's why the architect isn't configuring things. That's why they're not at the CLI. That's why they're not doing Python. That's why they're not doing Terraform. All this design takes in a tremendous amount of areas. I've gotten people cloud architect jobs that do nothing other than Cisco networking, and it was enough. So it's not a problem. And I have one of my students has had no tech background whatsoever. He's actually, of the last 9 people that have been hired, 3 have had 0 tech background and they were hired as cloud architects inside of 12 weeks. Several had several years of experience, and some have had a lot of experience. So it's not an issue whether you have experience or not. It's whether you can be completely competent. Can you explain the technology to the hiring manager? Can you show things? Sujit is an example who just commented. Sujit is one of the finest cloud architects I've ever met in my entire life. Sujit, and thank you for your kind words here. Sujit is an extremely capable and competent cloud architect and DevOps architect, and he's done everything. I think so highly of Sujit that if I create a DevOps program, he's going to be my DevOps instructor with me to do it, where I'll cover architecture and he'll cover DevOps. I would recommend. So Sujit, thank you for saying this. But that's why my point is somebody like Sujit that's coming to me more for leadership training versus somebody else like Dave, who's a data scientist that came to me for cloud training. And I've got people across a wide variety of disciplines, and that's what I like about this program, because we all teach each other things like that. So Sujit, I'm grateful for the things you've said. Coming from you, that makes me even more grateful, because I got to tell you, I've seen you in action, and you impress me every single day. So thank you, Sujit. You inspire me as a teacher and as a coach. Any other questions for me? I'm happy to answer any I possibly can. Okay, ABDL, you mean like the 2 where we design the architecture? So in my class, to let you know, ABDL, we do 2 sessions like that per week with my students, like you got to experience on the free webinar. And I got to say this, we go into much more complicated architectures in our student webinars. We do the kind of architectures that you can actually do, which will require you to have 5 or 10 years experience. I can't do that on the free ones. I did that for the community. My students have extreme depth of knowledge and they get it really fast. So because of that, we do live lectures, which are similar to what you've experienced, but a lot deeper. The kind of things that hiring managers definitely want. Well, Robert Cave, I'll tell you what we do. We typically have our people work on cloud security, not either one, and why? Here's why. So I went from being a network architect to doing cloud security architect work, and I love security. But let's face it, most things are going to the cloud, and the security on the cloud starts with the traditional way of firewalls and IDS, IPS systems, follow and some DDoS protection, which is typically in front of it, but somewhere there, and access control lists and security groups and host-based malware stuff. It's traditional, but there's a lot of other cool things that can be done in the cloud. Zscaler's got a model, and we'll explore all of them. What do I do with a lot of my people? I get them certified as a certified solutions architect professional, and then I help them with the forms and the filling out of things necessary to become a CISSP or a CEH. And then there's somebody like me. There's someone that's a security expert and a cloud expert all rolled into one. And that, Robert, is one of the main training programs we have for our students. And that offers you some of the best career opportunities in the world, combining a specialty with another specialty. So it's not an either or for me, Robert. It's if you're going to do security, and I was a CISSP for upwards of 15, 20 years before I let it expire. In addition to my CCIE, I will tell you that combine them and you will have opportunities like you can't imagine. That's what I highly recommend. And that's the way most of our people are training. We include a lot of security and a lot of architecture and a lot of networking training. So people basically can do that by a CISSP book or a CEH book, take that and have 2 big heavy hitter certifications and instantly sail into the career, especially with their soft skills, emotional intelligence, presentation skills, communication skills, and the such. That's our model. Drop the link for the program and a coupon code. What other questions do people have on tech, on careers, anything? I'm happy to answer them. I've got 17 more minutes before this is done, and I've got 2 calls already scheduled after this. But if you tell me any questions you have, I will literally do anything I can to try and help you. Any other questions for me? Are there any videos you'd like us to produce on our YouTube channel? Because we really try and listen to you and ask questions and produce anything we can to improve your experience. Great question. What is the knowledge gap between the associate and the professional? Look at it this way. The associate is more of a configuration things because it prepares people for like junior implementation engineer roles. The professional is more architectural, so they're going to make you have much more complicated questions where they're going to be combining services and they're going to be testing you on actual knowledge, like how does the load balancer work so you can make better decisions, for example. What are the idiosyncrasies? So at the associate level, they might ask you something like, which is the right thing that you can actually do to, what would they might ask you at the associate level? They might say, what are fully managed servers in the cloud, and they want Windows servers in the cloud, and they may want you to know FSX. At this level, they may basically say, you have a /28 subnet, for example. You have this number of load balancers, this number of servers for the web and the app tiers. All of a sudden, auto-scaling stops. What could be the cause? That would be the kind of question they would ask. And they want to know that, like, if you've got a /28, how many available hosts is that in AWS? It's 11. Did you run out of IP addresses? Did that stop auto-scaling? So that's kind of the difference. One is basically an application question. Do you know the material? And the other is basically just a simple question. I think we can, our students get deep dive discussions on third-party cloud solutions. And I put out some pretty deep questions on how to secure the VPC on my YouTube channel. If you're curious, I'll give you a link on how to do that, but they're all available on my YouTube channel. But I'm happy to make some more security videos, and I'd love to. Ramya, do we learn both the Asset Professional in my program? So yes, Ramya. You learn, typically speaking, we cover the advanced networking, advanced security, and the professional and associate in our program, but that's just so small. I mean, the AWS knowledge isn't really enough to get you guys a cloud architect job, even with all those 4 professional level certifications. It takes so much more, Ramya. It takes learning about cloud computing and learning about the network and learning about the data center and learning about all the technologies and learning how to architect and how to design. All that stuff is part of our program. I would say that when it comes to the certified solution architect, associate, and professional, that's no more than 10% of what's necessary to get a cloud architect job. It's the other 90% that we cover in addition to this 10%. That's why our results are so good, and that's why people come like from AWS to talk to our architects like they did yesterday. Because we're teaching the other 90% in addition to the 10%. Certification is only 10% of the process. Our certification, anybody else's certification, it's only 10%. We got to focus on the other 90%. Soft skills, emotional intelligence, presentation skills, writing skills, business acumen, negotiation, all critical skills for the architect. We cover them all. Hope I answered your questions, Ramya. Who else has any kind of question or for your cloud computing career? I'll definitely, we actually talked about a lift and shift architecture migration to the cloud, but maybe we'll do this. Maybe we'll make maybe we'll make another migration video to the cloud. I think that would be a good idea for a YouTube video. YHAM, we can do that. Dave, could you capture that question on making a deep dive migration to the cloud video and give that to Chris because he's keeping a list of questions for which people desire videos and we're going to be happy to make them. Okay, who else has a question? Anybody else have any questions for me? Got a few more minutes. Any career questions? What to plan? What to learn? Derek, I can give you 2 options. Option 1 is the reason I created this program, just to be fair, is because of the quality of the content I saw on Udemy. What actually happened, to put it into context, I'll be brutally honest with you, was I've been coaching people for many, 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 many years. And when I've been coaching people, and Robert, I'll get to you in a second, for many years, a friend of mine said, what should I do for my kid when he graduates college to actually learn something to be hireable and get a good job? And I said, he should learn cloud computing. So Derek, I literally bought him the 3 courses from the Australian providers. 2 were from Udemy. 1 was not on Udemy, but it was more expensive than the Udemy one. But the 3 courses from the Australians, I went and saw it and I went, oh my God, this is the most ridiculous, stupid content I've ever seen in my entire life. It taught him exactly how to configure everything, but nothing about how the cloud works. So what we did was instead, is I decided to write a book called Passing the Certified Solution Architect Professional Exam. I stripped 10 pages out of it and I gave it away completely free. So that's why all my Certified Solution Architect Associate books are out there for free. And just so you know, that's why I'm doing all this free AWS certification training, because I don't want anybody to be confused about cloud solutions that are out there. And I don't want anybody to buy something for which by the time they're done, they're not employable. So everything I do is about trying to deliver quality content. Obviously, students in our paid training programs get a lot more advantages, but I still want our free programs to be better than anybody else's paid programs in the market to really give you guys as much advantage as we can. So I'm looking through these questions. So Robert, sorry if I haven't been able to catch up with you. So what do you mean when you say my students? My students are the people that have been in my program that are brought into my course. People that are in my course get personally instructed by me twice per week, and they submit their homework assignments to me in a Slack channel. So I know every one of my students in my program because I mentor them constantly. I give them feedback, and they're all on our live training calls twice per week, Robert. So that's what I meant by my students. They're the people that I actually work with and mentor in my program. If you've got more questions, I'm thrilled to answer them. Rick, I look very forward to working with you. You'll get an email from Slack. You'll get a new email, and it's going to talk about joining the Slack channel. Make sure you follow that email, because that email does not come from me. It comes from our eCourse hosting provider. It's a cloud-based hosting provider. Sometimes that email could get stuck in a spam folder, so please check that. Data Dave, he's looking forward to getting to know you guys. Data Dave was one of my students. He became an intern of mine, and he's got some special things coming in my company. Data Dave is a data scientist, and he's a super capable data scientist. He's one of the 2 data scientists on my team. Any more questions, career or otherwise? Okay, give you guys a chance to ask some more questions if you're curious. I am. Nobody's rushing you. Would love to work with you when it's appropriate for you. I will say this. The average cloud architect in the US earns $600 per day. Every day you're not working could potentially cost you $600. So the sooner we work with people, the sooner they're done, but you can't do things with a time that's not right for you when you've got other things in your house. So whatever you do, whether you train with us, whether you train without us, try and use some of the guidance we provide in our videos to remove those things that aren't critical to your career so you can get to your destination soonest. The average cloud architect earns $600 a day. A good one can easily earn more than double that. So try to take the most direct path, whether you train with us or you train on your own. Please just focus on those things that matter most, which is understanding of the network, the data center, your communication skills, your emotional intelligence, your soft skills, your executive presence, your negotiation skills, and your business acumen, all critical skills for the cloud architect. I've got about 10 more minutes. Anybody else have any more questions? Well, Robert, you can ask my students on the call. There's no cookie cutter content here. It took me 25 years to build this content, $250,000 on education, and we do mentorship along the way. There's nothing cookie cutter. We help you develop your own personalized development plans for every one of you. We have got some management consulting things where people do their own questions. I don't do any cookie cutter content at all. There's certain things that we use that are necessary for tech careers and leadership, and everything else we do is manually done. David, question or hands-on exercise. Do you need to buy your own server? No. We provide servers completely free to all of our students in the Cloud Architect Career Development Program and Experience Program. Bear with me. I hear something moving around my office. Can't figure out what it is, so I guess we don't need to know. Derek, we cover everything you need to know to be a competent and capable cloud architect. Daniel, $600 a day is on average. I'd say lots of new people come in 100 to 120. It's very easy and very common to get $300,000 and $400,000 a year job offers if you're a good cloud architect on a daily basis, even without you looking for them. I do. And many, many, many other CCIEs that I know and people with experience all do. Sorry for that sound in the background. I thought I heard something that sounded like it was moving. Apparently some shelf must have fallen off. Apparently I've got too many routers, switches, and firewalls sitting in my closet in my office. Well, that's just a part of life. Any other questions for me? But Daniel, I will say this. When it actually comes to actually negotiating your salary and earning your salary, and you can look this up, your soft skills has a bigger impact than your technical competency. You can look it up and you'll see that people that train emotional intelligence earn on average $29,600 more than those that don't. People with a good interview can easily earn an additional $10,000 to $50,000 by being more attractive to the employer. So whatever you do, with me, without me, make sure you're focused on your emotional intelligence and your executive presence and your communication skills. Why am? That's a really great question. We basically let people stay in the program for the most part until they actually find a job. Realistically speaking, and then Robert, I can definitely tell you what the biggest sticking point is in a second. So we limit access to our servers to 16 weeks. Otherwise, our cost would be a fortune. But If people need to stay on our program 6 months, 9 months, stay on our group calls for 9 months to a year to get their first job because they have no background and maybe they can only train 4 hours a week or practice 4 hours a week, we don't care. All we care is that our students find a job when they're done and are successful in their careers. It's not an issue for us. So Robert, I will give you this advice. For anybody that's interviewed for more than 3 positions and not been hired, there is a complete and total problem. The problem is one of the following. It's either interview skills, soft skills, presentation skills, or technical competency. No one should ever go on more than 3 interviews and not get a job. I will tell you that I've interviewed for 5 jobs in my 25-year career, and I've been hired by all 5 jobs. Why? Because I did a lot of research in the beginning of my career. I spoke to 50 executive recruiters in terms of what the average hiring manager desires, and I knew what they wanted. I also focused on all the things the recruiters told me initially. I built a system 20 some years ago to help people get their first jobs based upon my experience coming from medicine directly into engineering with no experience or no degrees in engineering, and it was never a problem. It was when I first tried, and then I instantly spoke to recruiters and they told me, Hal, I've spoken to thousands of hiring managers over the course of my career, and here's the biggest sticking point. When you interview the average person, and I've interviewed 5,000 people in my career, and I've interviewed 1,000 AWS certified people in the last 6 weeks. I'm sorry, in the last 12 weeks. 1,000 of them were certified. Of the 1,000 of them, many of them had 3 to 6 certifications, and I asked them simple architecture questions. How do you design this? How do you do this? How do you do this? Almost none had any concept. None. Certified solution architect professional, even people that had 8 and 9 AWS certifications, no concept how to design an architecture. So the biggest sticking point that I can tell you first and foremost is no concept of architecture design, because the certification exams teach you the name of the service and how to configure it, and that's not architecture, that's implementation engineering. We'll tell you the next biggest thing where people fail is when they go on a job interview, they lie. You ask them a question they don't know, they lie. That's typically where people get stuck. So what does the hiring manager care about? I'm going to tell you, the hiring manager cares about the following. Technical competency, can you do the job? The next thing the hiring manager cares about, and it's overwhelmingly, can they trust you? The next thing the hiring manager cares about is, are you safe? Meaning, do you know what you know and do you know what you don't know? Are you energetic? Are you enthusiastic or passionate? Can you bring out the best in others? Are you willing to go above and beyond? And are you a team player? These are the things that need to be communicated. So where do things go wrong when you interview people? First question is to tell me about yourself. Most people don't know how to answer that in 10 seconds or less. Why? The hiring managers are busy people with a short attention span. If you can't capture them in the first 10 seconds, your interview's over. If we ask you a technical question and you bluff or lie, even if we're polite, the interview's over because you just proved to us we can't trust you because a bluff is a lie. So I'd say 99% of all interviews fail due to technical competency, meaning the lack of knowledge of what architecture actually is, or lying, or the remaining parts are communication skills. When I ask someone interview questions, and that's why I made so many videos on interview questions, what's object storage? And they say S3. S3 is the AWS brand of object storage, but that's not telling me what object storage is. Again, not hireable. What is an EC2 instance? If someone says an instance, they don't, again, not hireable. If they don't understand virtualization and how virtualization works and how you size virtual machines, not hireable. If they don't know the difference of when to use a VM and when to use a container, not hireable. If people can't look at BGP and say, how do you load share or across redundant BGP connections, or how do you prioritize or block a BGP connection or traffic engineer, not hireable. If someone thinks NAT is only connecting from the internet, not hireable. If you ask someone to explain a complicated technology and they can't explain what it is, how it works, why to use it, not hireable. On all good cloud architect jobs, and these are going to be good paying jobs, they're going to ask you to deliver a presentation in front of a large audience. If you can't do that, you're not hireable. And you know what else they might do when you're delivering a presentation? They might start a fight or start throwing things in the room to see if you can control it, to see if you're emotionally intelligent or not. I had to do it for a job interview that literally Cisco started a fight with 5 different people in the room, started throwing things at each other and yelling to see if I could take control of it, which I did, and then I got hired. These are the big, big, big things. Can they push you hard, and can you come out with things in a soft, responsible manner, because they may try to do this? These are the kind of places where things go wrong, Robert. It's almost exclusively lack of technical competency, lack of architecture knowledge, because architecture knowledge is different than certification knowledge, or it's lack of the appropriate soft skills, communication skills to be able to describe your knowledge of technology. And especially if it's your new job and you're not optimally qualified, you need to look extra good and likable. I hired this person, we'll call him Avi, it's not his real name, but it's similar to what his name would have been. He interviewed with me 20 some years ago. I interviewed him and it was for a network engineering position, and I asked him about BGP and he said, I'm sorry, I've never worked on BGP. I said, how about OSPF? And he said, I've never worked on that. I said, could you describe the process of routing to me? And he couldn't. I said, could you describe the process of switching? And he couldn't. But he told me, honestly, I don't know. But I've worked with it and I'm motivated and I liked him. I said, what did you know? And he says, Windows NT 4.0. I said, tell me about Windows NT 4.0. And you know what? He knew it. So I learned he could learn. But something happened with Avi. His attitude, his energy, his enthusiasm, his passion was so good. He was so likable that I literally went to my manager and I said, I'm hiring Avi. My manager says he's a good network architect, not good network engineer. And I said, no, he's never done it in his life. And he said, then why are you hiring Avi? I said, Avi is one of the most likable people I've ever met. He's got the right attitude, the right energy, enthusiasm, passion. He's honest. He's trustworthy. He knows what he knows and he doesn't know. And I'm going to get him there. 4 months later, Avi was not only a great hire. 20 years later, I just spoke to Avi recently, and Avi, like me, likes to do a lot of things to help the world. Avi is now in a business where he produces low-cost Chromebooks for the developing world, and he's got hundreds of thousands of customers all over the world that he's provided cheap access to computers for in their own country of origin. And I'm very proud of the big difference he's making in the world. None of that would have been possible if I didn't hire him based on his attitude. So lots of times we hire on attitude if the soft skills are there. So if the right soft skills, communication skills, and executive presence are there, we're willing to look through a lot of weaknesses in technology. So that's why you got to build that plus your architecture knowledge. Robert, I hope I've answered your question. Naveed, it's a good question. We have to figure out first what kind of position you would like. There's hundreds of cloud architect positions, and like it could be security versus the infrastructure versus application. So if you tell us exactly what type of career you want, Naveed, in the cloud, then and only then can I make sure that I can give you an answer, but I don't want to give you just redundant certifications until I know your exact career, because otherwise it might not be in your best interest. Thank you, Robert. Any more questions for me? Okay, well, I hope you've all had a wonderful experience. If you had a wonderful experience, please type Cloud Architect in the comment section. If you can leave a like, it's very helpful to us. Leave a comment in the video if appropriate. Share this video with anyone that you think would be helped. Our free training mission is important to us. We try to do the best we can with what we can do on YouTube and LinkedIn to try and provide some free quality training opportunities for people that can't afford to purchase them. We want to at least make sure we give them a good free training option. So if you've liked this, please leave a like. If you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. Hit the bell so you can be informed of new things. I think we're going to have some really cool networking things coming very soon. Any last minute questions for me? Let me know now. Otherwise, thank you all. It's been a wonderful experience talking to you and spending the week with you. I hope to see you in more videos. I hope to see some of you in classes. I will drop one more time the link to our program, as well as the link to a coupon code. And since today is the last time I'm allowed to do it, I will even leave my phone number. I won't be posting them in the future anymore, according to my team on YouTube. Thank you, everyone. It's been a real pleasure to speak with you. Hope to speak to more of you much closer very soon. Take care, everybody. Thank you all. I'm really grateful for your presence and participation.